We want to keep that in the Assembly. But welcome all of you. We're here for what we hope will be a very important hearing, informational hearing about what's becoming, as we sit here, an even more important challenge that the legislature in the state of California faces, and that's how our criminal justice system works or does not work, how each components of the parts of that system works collaboratively and collectively for all of the 38 million citizens of California, for the people who don't interact with the systems, people who do, who people have been in the system, and to see if it can work better for everyone. And we are going to be challenged probably later this week when the governor comes out with his May revision on many, many levels, but probably most likely in this level in particular. So how better do we run criminal safety and public safety in the state of California? In my mind's eye, that's what we're going to talk about today. And in the spirit of Little Hoover Commission's comments, that we have, I hate this expression sometimes, but in our toolbox, we probably have studied every tool and the way to implement every tool, but we don't do it together. So how better can we create a gestalt, a moment around the total being greater than the sum of the parts? So as we look at a $20 billion shortfall this coming fiscal year with the rest of this year and next, we want to see if we can assure the public that we're doing better when it comes to their public safety. And again, that includes every constituent, no matter which community they're in. Before I turn it over to my co-chair, I would like to remind the panelists that we have a fairly aggressive agenda today. Deliberately, there's a lot of substance on this agenda. We would like you to try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or thereabouts so that we can get everybody in and allow for the public to speak as well. So with that, we are going to share responsibilities. I'm going to take the first couple of panels, and then my colleague from the Assembly, Assemblymember Fartani, will take over the meeting. But for now, I just ask if you have any comments before we go to the first panel and the historical context from the LAO.
Thank you very much, Senator Gisani. Am I on? Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I look forward very much to this hearing, but first of all, I don't want it to be said that it takes the collective knowledge of 5 Assembly members to offset 1 senator, but my whole committee is here and accounted for on time, so just wanted that go to the record. I particularly am interested in this hearing. I'm a new chair of Subcommittee 4 and have had a chance to talk to some of you in the audience, and sometimes I may have had the appearance of being a deer caught in the headlights. Well, I'm pleased to be able to look at this issue in particular from the standpoint of a continuum, rather than piecemeal, a little this, a little of that, really look at it as a system, and I think that's how our approach has to be. And the testimony that I'm looking forward to hearing is being broken into several pieces, but basically we're talking about 3 fundamental components that makes the issue. How we can make it function better remains to be seen, but your testimony and the public comment that some of you might be here to make is going to be very important as we proceed forward. We also have Secretary Cates with us from the administration and the executive branch. We really appreciate his attendance, and this is going to be an effort that's going to involve all 3 branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, relative to making this system work. And again, I really appreciate the committee's attendance on the Assembly side, and appreciate everybody being here. And Senator Gisani, it's yours.
Thank you. Well, there may be other senators who equate 6 Assembly members to 1, but I definitely don't. And I will remember, we're a little bit competitive here, but it's just sibling rivalry between the Assembly and the Senate. But I will remind my colleagues it is the afternoon, and we in the Senate like to take a nap, so that may be why we're late. With that, we'd like the Legislative Analyst Office to come up and give us the first panel, historical context and a little analytical framework. Welcome, Paul.
With the Legislative Analyst's Office. First, I'll give you some background on crime and corrections in California to put into context some of the specific options that you'll be hearing about from some of the other panelists. And I'll also talk about an analytical framework that our office suggested as part of last year's budget process for evaluating different policy options. To start with, if you refer to page 3 in your agenda, you'll see that there's a chart there that shows how crime rates have changed in California over the past 25 years. And you'll notice that there has been a significant drop in both property crimes and violent crimes over this time period. In particular, property crimes have decreased by about half, property crime rates, that is. There's no clear consensus at the moment from criminologists as to why crime rates have dropped so much over the past 25 years. There's a lot of different competing theories. Some of them have to do with changing demographics, that as society has gotten older, there are fewer people are likely to commit crime as they age. Increased incarceration rates is another reason that has been examined, as well as changing police techniques, relatively low unemployment over the past couple of decades, and a variety of other different reasons. It's important to note, though, that while crime rates have dropped in California, they've also dropped nationally as well. If you refer to the next page in your handout, page 4, there's a chart that shows you how the adult inmate and parole population has changed over the same time period. And you'll notice that there's been a significant increase, particularly in the prison population over the past 25 years. It's changed from about 43,000 inmates about 25 years ago to about 167,000 inmates today. As you can see, most of that growth occurred during the early 1990s and throughout the late 1980s, and it's been relatively stable over the past decade. There's also been significant increases in the jail population during the same time period. Last year, as part of our budget analysis, we tried to examine some of the reasons for the growth in the prison and parole populations. And we found that most of it was related to new admissions from the courts. And this would include both offenders sentenced with a new term as well as parole violators. And also trying to further delve into some of the reasons for the increase in the prison population, we looked at the effect of law enforcement and prosecution and found that that prosecutors were more likely to achieve convictions over the past 25 years, so more offenders are being sentenced to prison as one of the main contributors to the increase in the prison population. So really the bottom line is there's no real consensus on why crime has dropped over this period, although our incarceration has definitely gone up. We know that if people are incarcerated, they cannot commit a new crime while they're in prison, so that could be one possible reason, but there are definitely others that have been studied. And also we think that local corrections, law enforcement, prosecution are also important in terms of thinking about how state prison population has changed. So in thinking about sort of an analytical framework, as you know, the governor is going to release his revised budget on Friday, and the state will have a significant fiscal shortfall. And in thinking about how to achieve state prison savings, last year we suggested an analytical framework that included 5 different criteria. And I'll note that as with any policy option, there's trade-offs associated with any of the ones within corrections. The first criteria that we encouraged you to look at was the budget savings, how much the policy option would achieve and the benefit to the state budget. Not only the magnitude of the savings, but also the timing. How quickly would the savings be achieved in the budget year? Would they be achieved over the longer term? Those are all important considerations, as well as whether or not there would be upfront costs to consider in order to get future savings. The second criteria that we encouraged you to look at was public safety. Would the option, in fact, improve public safety? For example, would it reduce recidivism rates? If not, was there any way to mitigate the impact on public safety? The third factor that we urged you to consider was the impact of the option on prison overcrowding. As you know, the prisons are currently overcrowded. The state has been in court with a 3-judge panel regarding the overcrowding. It's currently on appeal. But in looking at different policy options, we would urge you to consider whether or not the option addresses prison overcrowding, which could also potentially reduce future capital outlay costs. The fourth criteria that we came up with was the ease of implementation of the policy option. So how easily could it be implemented? Would it require significant operational changes for CDCR? Would it involve creating new programs that take time to get up and running? Or would it be a relatively easy change, such as a statutory change to state sentencing laws? And the final factor that we urged you to consider was the impact on local governments. A lot of different policy options for corrections involve shifts to local jails or probations, and so it's important to think about what impact the option would have on local governments. And then finally, we think that you should try to choose the options that best meet your priorities while also mitigating all of the potential trade-offs. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? None. Thanks, Paul. Thank you for a good framework. Panel number 2, if you could come forward. This is options for improving community corrections. The Honorable Roger Warren, Jerry Powers, Chief Probation Officer, Stanislaus County will follow Judge Warren, and then Jan Scully, the District Attorney of Sacramento from the Sacramento County and Chair of the California Council on Criminal Justice. And for those of you who may be here for public testimony, that will follow panel number 5. I apologize, it's not on the agenda. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
It's like Yogi Berra said, it's like deja vu all over again for some of us. Judge Warren, I believe you're first.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Roger Warren. I'm a retired judge from the Sacramento Superior Court, now serving as scholar in residence with the Administrative Office of the Courts, where I oversee the AOC's community corrections activities. I am also the immediate past president of the National Center for State Courts and serve as the principal consultant to the National Center and to Pew Charitable Trust in connection with sentencing and corrections reform initiatives nationally. The fact sheet that is being distributed describes the Community Corrections Program at the Administrative Office of the Courts, where we have pulled together 12 to 15 staff to work on a series of recent initiatives, all affecting community corrections. The centerpiece of these initiatives is clearly Senate Bill 678 from the last session. If California's prison overcrowding crisis has taught us anything, I suppose, it is the importance of California renewing its commitment to the front end of its sentencing and correction system. As the LAO analysis pointed out, 2/3 of the increase in our state prison population results from the approximate doubling of the use of prisons as dispositions in felony arrest cases, and 2/3 of all prison admissions are of nonviolent offenders. You may not know that California is the only state in the nation that has not invested traditionally over the last 20 years any significant state funding in probation. In every other state in this country, there is a regular appropriation of state general funds to support felony probation services at the community level. In light of these developments, clearly the most promising development in California is the passage last year of SB 678 and companion legislation, and we are working at the ALC cooperatively with the chief probation officers in an attempt to implement that legislation. I would like to focus here on the 3 of the most significant challenges I think we face in implementing SB 678, and then a couple of further opportunities that I think California has to improve community corrections in California. The first challenge is for the courts. At the end of the day, of course, it is judges and courts that decide whether people on probation are going to be sentenced to prison, either for a new felony offense or as the result of a revocation of probation. Despite that fact, there is nothing in SB 678 that deals with the courts directly and asks the courts to do anything in particular. There's nothing that provides any educational or information out to the judges about SB 678. Most judges still haven't heard of SB 678. And as a consequence, we at the AOC have gone out and tapped federal grant funds and are talking with private foundations to seek funding so that we can educate the courts about SB 678, get judges to be working cooperatively with their probation departments to implement SB 678. The second two challenges have to do directly with probation. We've had a chance to review the applications from the various probation departments to CalEMA for release of the $45 million burn Justice Assistance Grant Funds to jumpstart the introduction of evidence probation and supervision practices in probation. And probation departments, in our view, have done a remarkable job in hitting the nail right on the head in terms of the kinds of plans they have in their departments to develop evidence-based practices. But we are concerned about the dramatic reductions in county support for probation just over the last several months and what may well be imminent future reductions in the county's commitment to probation, especially in light of the promise, the potential of additional state support for probation. The whole idea of SB 678, was to build on a base of county support in probation, and by adding additional state resources, allow probation to ramp up the quality of its services, the effectiveness of its programs in order to produce better outcomes, thereby reducing prison commitments out of probation. But probation's ability to reduce commitments below the levels of 2006 to 2008, as SB 678 contemplates, requires that these county resources remain in the probation system. If the county takes out the county resources, the positive impact of the new state dollars are going to be totally wiped out by the loss of the existing county dollars. We therefore think that it's critical that to the success of SB 678, that the pre-existing levels of county support for felony probation remain in place. The counties have to keep some skin in this game. Existing law does not appear to require that. Although there are provisions in the Budget Act of last year and in SB 678 that require funds, state funds, to supplement and not supplant county operations. Many of these probation cuts were made before the AB1 funds hit the street, and further cuts may well be imminent before SB 678 funds finally are generated, which won't be until at least the adoption of the next budget, your 2011-12 budget. And even then, it's not clear whether these supplantation provisions are going to stem the outgoing tide of county resources. It's also important to note, I think, that although SB 678 provides a fiscal incentive to probation to improve probation effectiveness, it does not provide any explicit fiscal incentive to the counties. As a result, counties may continue to feel that that they don't have a stake in continuing to fund probation services, and it may continue not to be a high priority for the counties. This is despite the fact, I think, that in fact the counties do have a stake in probation outcomes. All of the research indicates that evidence-based felony supervision probation practices result in cost reductions that far exceed the cost of those programs, cost reductions that benefit overwhelmingly to county-funded services, law enforcement services, prosecution, defense, social welfare costs, and of course also reduce harm to victims and cost to victims. We at the ALC therefore feel that there is an urgent need for a working group to be created with legislators or legislative staff and representatives from the courts, probation, and the counties at least, to see what can be done to reduce the outflow of county resources to probation and determine the best ways to try to address that challenge, including perhaps through other fiscal incentives to the counties to ensure continued county funding of felony probation services. Unless some action is taken to retain county investment in felony probation, you will find yourself, I think, in the position where you will have to reconsider the funding mechanism in SB 678. And to the extent that the loss of county funding occurs, it will be impossible for probation departments to meet the 06 to 08 baseline commitment rates, to lower prison commitment rates below that unless there is some downward adjustment in those formulas. Thirdly, the third challenge, many of the options that are discussed in the LAO report to reduce prison costs will have the effect of transferring responsibility and the resulting costs for felony offenders to local government. To ensure public safety, most of those felony offenders or the offenders now incarcerated in county jails that will be released from jails to make room for the new felony offenders no longer going to prison will be, or at least should be, supervised on probation, and in appropriate cases probably intensively and monitored intensively. Unless additional resources are provided to probation, the resulting increase in workload for probation will have the same result as the county probation cuts, undermining the purposes of SB 678 and the ability of probation to reduce new commitments, resulting, I think, within 18 months in felony probationers being right back on the doorstep of the California prison system. One solution to this challenge that would protect public safety, reduce prison costs, preserve SB 678, and reduce future prison commitments would be for the state to share a portion of the prison costs saved through those options with probation departments for the purpose of enhancing the provision of evidence-based supervision practices. Turning to two other opportunities, I think, before I quit, there are, I think what makes SB 678 special are the principles that it's based on. Performance, incentive, funding, accountability both on the part of offenders and on the part of probation and the administrative office of the courts, but most importantly, the mandate that these funds be expended exclusively on evidence-based practices, that is, those demonstrated by scientific research to reduce recidivism. You should consider expanding the scope of the mandate with regard to evidence-based practices so that the expenditure of all state funds intended to promote public safety through either crime prevention or recidivism reduction strategies at the local level should be subject to the requirement of being expended in accord with research-based principles. These principles should apply also to federal burn justice assistance grant funds received by California and expended for those purposes. Indeed, in light of the challenges to SB 678 that I just outlined, the legislature should again consider this year, as you did last, requiring that some or all of the local justice assistance grant funds be used to ensure the expanded development of evidence-based felony probation supervision practices. Finally, there are two tools from your toolbox, Senator, that are important in any evidence-based probation supervision framework that were not included in SB 678 that are being addressed to some extent now on the parole side. The first is probation violation response, policies, grids, guidelines. From the LAO report, you know that one of the evidence-based practices that reduces the use of incarceration by almost 50% is the use of swift and certain sanctions in disciplining probation violations. We need to do business differently in the way we handle probation violations. Today, we let one violation after another slide until the offender has accumulated enough that it's worth taking him back to court, where the court, frustrated that a year has gone by and one violation after another was not addressed, decides that it's too late and pulls the plug and sends the offender to prison. Every violation by probation should be met with some sort of immediate response by probation. And in other states, they have set up policies and grids and guidelines that guide probation officers in the application of swift and certain sanctions for every probation violation. The second tool is the use of administrative sanctioning authority. In many other states, probation has authority to impose swift and certain sanctions without taking every offender back to court. By the very nature of the court process, if you wait until you've taken every offender back to court for a judicial hearing to figure out what to do about the dirty test, 30 days have gone by, and you totally lose the effectiveness of that process. And so in other states, probation officers are typically authorized to impose up to 30 or 60 days of jail time in small increments of maybe just 3 days or 5 days each, with the approval of a supervisor and sometimes with the approval of a judge, accomplished by a memo or something, or accomplished by the offender agreeing to accept that sanction rather than go back to court, where the offender is likely to be dealt with less gently by the court. Those two tools would be tremendously important, especially to reduce probation revocations. Without those two tools in the toolbox, it is much more difficult for probation departments and the courts to reduce revocations to prison, where the courts don't get involved until there's multiple violations that have already been committed. So if we're going to get on top of revocations, I think we have to get on top of them quickly and with certainty. Thank you very much.
Your Honor, and we're going to save our questions till the end if that's possible, and we'll go to next to Chief Powers. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, to both chairs and members of the committee. Jerry Powers, Chief Probation Officer in Stanislaus County and the Ledge Chair for the Chief Probation Officers of California. First, I have to give a disclaimer. After you hear my presentation, Mr. Warren and I did not get together prior to prepare our comments, so
you're not under oath. So.
They're going to sound remarkably similar, and I probably owe him lunch for a couple of his comments. I appreciated them. Second, I would like to give kudos to whoever prepared your packet today. Outstanding job. Very, very good job by your staff in putting a lot of information in a very understandable format here. So I learned a few things actually in this, so great job. The criminal justice continuum, as we know it in California, is undergoing significant change. In fact, the concept of a continuum is really a misnomer today. When thinking of a continuum, one typically pictures a systematic scheme or approach encompassing a beginning, a middle, and an end. In California, due to fiscal pressures, overcrowding, federal court oversight, the specter of more significant oversight, as well as other pressures, this continuum has actually morphed into a circle. The circle contains a nearly endless path of local arrest, prosecution, supervision, state incarceration, non-revocable parole, recidivism, more local prosecution, state incarceration, parole revocation, and the cycle repeats at each of these steps. Given the tens of thousands of offenders annually who repeatedly travel this circle, the circle quickly becomes a hole that taxpayers put billions into annually. Nearly three-quarters of the adult felony offenders who are convicted annually in California and who are eligible for state prison commitment are in fact committed to local jails and a term of probation instead of state prison. The state spends approximately $10 billion annually on the other 25%. The annual cost to incarcerate an offender in state prison had been estimated at very near $50,000 per offender per year. In these trying fiscal times, we have to acknowledge that we must take a smarter, more effective approach to the entire system if we were to manage it in a cost-effective and, most importantly, safe manner. Last year, for the first time in my memory, I believe the state has finally begun to acknowledge that the success or failure of the local probation system has a direct impact on the state system. It is not an easy admission for me or my peers to say that the local adult probation system is broken. It has been broken by neglect at both the local and state levels. California is the only state that has not historically provided funding for probation services. In fact, if you review the states that are cited as models in your staff report, you'll find that there is a significant state funding relationship for probation services in those states. In reviewing the information in your handout, it's clear that the increase in the state prison population is nearly exactly mirrored by the increase in probation populations. In fact, looking at your report, if you look at page 4, the graph on page 4, and you look at the graph on page 9, the graph on 4 is the increase in inmate and parolee populations, and page 9 is the growth in adult jail and probation populations. If you take that line for the growth in the adult probation population and you were to put these over the top of each other, you would see virtually identical trend lines for both of these. This relationship is further strengthened when you overlay the probation revocation trends and the state prison population. This is a graph, and I apologize that it's small. I think we may have the hard copies for you that have been given to you. This is a graph that shows the trend lines for the state prison population and the probation revocation population. The thin blue line is the probation revocation population, and these blue bars are the state prison population. Again, nearly identical. There is a relationship. I think research has showed us that. Certainly, all the information that we have has confirmed that. If we can agree that failure on the local probation level directly correlates to increased population in the state prison system, then conversely, success at that same level will result in reduced state prison population and the subsequent direct savings to the state, and just as important, the indirect savings to our communities in fewer offenders and better public safety outcomes. SB 678 by Senator Leno is a progressive attempt at forming a beneficial partnership between the state and counties to provide more effective evidence-based services to the local felony offender population, and thus responsibly reduce the number of offenders who fail the local system and ultimately become the responsibility of the state. SB 678 is a work in progress. It is in its infancy, and frankly, the stimulus funding used to get the program off the ground statewide is only a fraction of what is needed to have it implemented in a robust manner to achieve results quickly. SB 678 does, however, highlight that locals in the state can effectively work together to the benefit of both if trust and commitments are kept. SB 678 is a tremendous opportunity for locals and the state. Finally, I'd close by saying that this is one of many areas in the system that we can partner with, but we must also be vigilant that while we're building on this side, that we don't undermine the progress with other actions that negate this progress. The local budgets are just as bad as the state's, as evidenced right here in Sacramento County. There's a proposal being considered in Sacramento County to reduce probation funding by nearly $25 million. That's nearly 50% of their general fund budget. If this happens, this would eliminate all adult probation services to the entire county of Sacramento. SB 678 would not come close to compensating for the negative impact of that reduction in Sacramento, and would ultimately result in an upward shift or realignment of offenders, ultimately transferring them and their costs to the state. Counties, we're always, and frankly probation, we're always on the lookout for that cost shift down. My fear is that we may start to see some of that cost shift up. You may see offenders start to be placed into state custody, certainly at a significantly higher cost, if we don't ensure that we keep those resources where they need to be at the local level. Essentially, I've echoed what Judge Warren said about making sure that we try to protect those local resources and build on them with the SB 678 model. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. We're excited about it, and we're ready to move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Powers. Thank you for your kind words for our staff. The chairs would like to take credit for writing this, but we didn't. We just hired the staff.
It was evident real early.
Careful. Speaking about placements, welcome. You're next, Ms. Scully.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Jan Scully. I'm the District Attorney for Sacramento County for the last 16 years. And I chair the California Council on Criminal Justice, which is a body that approves the state plan for the issuance of federal burn JAG funding. And we also look at big picture criminal justice issues, particularly as it relates to policy. All public safety is local. Whatever laws are passed or changes are made to our criminal justice system, even at the state level, meaning parole, whether released inmates are supervised or on banked parole, whether they can return to prison for a parole violation or not, whether we eliminate parole, change crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, keep felons who commit lower-level offenses from going to prison, keeping them local, it all impacts us in our communities. And so my comments primarily are focused on a local perspective. First of all, I want to, if I could underscore, because I've heard in different ways that we are a system, and we are particularly a system at the local level, and that's where we can be the most effective, is being a system at the local level, which means that all stakeholders, all participants in the system actually have to come together to figure out how to solve some of these public safety challenges, whether it be supervising felony probationers or whatever it is. And I'm going to give a kudos to Judge Warren. Back in the early 90s, Sacramento County actually established a criminal justice cabinet, which is made up of such stakeholders that actually talk about how we can work together for program efficiencies, how we can streamline, how we can do programs that are effective and actually complement the work that we do without giving up our individual independence and missions that we are charged with accomplishing. And that has been very effective in Sacramento. We've established, for example, a violation of probation court, because it is true that with no probation officers, there is no accountability. And when there's no accountability or consequence, or people aren't worried about that, then nobody fears breaking the law. And technically, probation actually is an arm of the court, even though it's funded at the local level, and that actually undermines, I believe, the power and the authority of judges to make a difference in their community. And we are seeing a perfect storm from a budgetary standpoint, because we have, at the local level, have inherited a lot of challenges economically from the state, and we are facing terrible local challenges, and probation, as a reality, is at the bottom of the political food chain. Law enforcement, cops on the street are very important. Prosecutors in the courtroom are very important. And I would say probation doesn't get any business unless prosecutors get convictions. But probation is the first to be cut of the public safety agency, and they are integral to our system. We have increased prison populations, I believe, because we have failed at the front end. We have failed because probation is not adequately resourced. On probation, you have to be, first of all, whether you're committing a crime or you're violating your probation, you need to have accountability, and you need to have consequence, whatever that might be. But you also need to have intervention services, for example, community-based organizations, to provide what needs to be done to help a felony probationer get back on track and stay on track. Because if we give them the opportunity and the services to be successful, then not only do they win, but the community wins, because people are safer. And so it's very important that we do that. Right now, we often find actually competition when we talk about those that are on parole. We at the local level have to compete getting services for our felony probationers with parolees who are also need to get services. So we really need intervention efforts and transition efforts for local felony probationers, those that do jail time, for example. When they come out, they need to have a plan and a probation officer that can help them transition successfully onto probation and then move off of probation, having accomplished what they need to accomplish. That keeps them from going to prison on the front end or through the front door. And we also need reentry programs for our parolees, those that are in prison. It needs to start while they're in prison, and then they need those same reentry opportunities to transition back into the community. We have to live with all of them, and maybe there should be some thought to consolidating, because we are all serving the same groups and we are all sharing the same services. The other area, and if I would say more about the programs, I would be repeating what you've heard previous to me. But as we are talking about local services and we're talking about intervention and prevention and accountability and consequences, we're talking about the adult criminal justice system. I think it would be a mistake for us only to focus on the adult criminal justice system, because we have juveniles that are coming through our juvenile justice system, and they are also the responsibility of probation. And if they are not adequately resourced in that regard, too, we will lose these children to the adult system, because they're not getting the interventions and the services that they need, and we need to start there. And that's just not having adequate probation. It's having after-school programs like Boys and Girls Club, for example, where kids, instead of joining their gangs to keep busy, actually can go to a program and do homework. We need to focus efforts on truancy. Truancy is the single gateway event for children that moves them into our juvenile justice system and our adult system, because if they're not educated, they're not productive, they're not responsible, they're at risk for becoming juvenile offenders and for becoming victims. And our juvenile Superior Court juvenile judge will tell you that that's the common denominator that he sees. And what we need is programs that are reaching families, because juveniles that are truant are juveniles that have dysfunctional families. And there's something going on there, and so it needs to be a multi-disciplinary effort that focuses on that. In Sacramento, we have a number of those that I think would be important to be considered as looking out for how do we get in early. We need to work with our cops more, especially with fewer probation resources, to actually work with their own diversion programs for dealing with juveniles that they come in contact with firsthand, to work with them so maybe that juvenile doesn't get any farther. There's a lot of opportunities for our juveniles in our communities, but we're not focusing on that as much as we need to, because we don't have enough resources to do that, and they're going into our adult system. We have to have a combination of both: consequence and accountability, intervention and prevention, both at the state and adult level as well as the juvenile level.
Thank you. Just one question, and then I'll ask my colleagues if they have questions, the whole panel. This goes... When I was in local government, we had a very creative county administrator. I may have told this story before. Very good at the color of money. And before the reorganization on the juvenile side, when we still had CYA, we went through this needs assessment with the East Bay Community Foundation. We did part of it with Alameda and Contra Costa County. But the idea was to look at many of the things all of you mentioned, is how do you do cost avoidance, how do you do intervention at a community level, how do you do options to adjudication, whether it's community service for juveniles. So we went through this whole needs assessment. East Bay Community Foundation paid $500,000 or so to do it. We came back, we started looking at implementing that for the very idea that Ms. Scully, you talked about, is if we could start at the juvenile side, maybe we could start developing. And what the foundations, not just East Bay, asked us to do was a condition of getting this grant for the needs assessment was that we would develop a continuum, not a circle. And this was 15 or 20 years ago, so if we had done it, maybe we could actually see more outcomes now. But the condition of getting the money was they wanted a reinvestment strategy. So if we did all these things And we started, as you said, I think, Your Honor, or Chief, if you actually started avoiding those costly expenses to what was then CYA, then could you reinvest some of that, identify that money and keep reinvesting? So over time, you would see the trend lines change. And the response from some of the administrators was, after we went through all that, this is under the old model, is why would we want to do that? Would be saving the state money. And it's not because there wasn't a desire to do the right thing, but I think the crisis that we constantly find ourselves in when it comes to probation, irregardless of whether we have a good economy or not, because it always seems that way, as you said, Ms. Scully, to change that. So if we were to look at realignment, I think there's a growing interest, not just because of LA's report on probation parole, but if we were to give more of these functions from the state to you, how would that look, given you try to get a model where, back to Judge, your sort of comments of, we don't have a lot of money to give incentives to have, I think you said, I'm forgetting the expression, but it's a gambling expression. If the counties want to be engaged, you have to
keep skin in
the game. Thanks. I'm showing I'm not a gambler, except for my professional life. So, do you have a model in Sacramento or in the Valley where, if we did a form of realignment and basically gave you the functions, and then in part of that is the problem with the dysfunctionality of county and city public safety, right, is, as you alluded to, do you work with the health department who works with employment and human services department who works with probation and the bench and the DA and the police chiefs to make sure that you're all integrating services in such a way that if the targeted community is getting the maximum amount of services rather than have all this stovepipe operation. So I guess in a perfect world, if we would do realignment, give you more money, give your local governing bodies more authority to raise taxes in their jurisdiction, but another caveat that we actually want to see those trend lines start to change and not just assume that you're going to do the right thing.
Well, and let me address realignment. In county government, certainly you coming from county government, realignment can be a dirty word.
Right.
It usually means cost shift from state to locals. I will say, to the state's credit, the realignment that we did with DJJ, the state has been very good about keeping its word to date. And so that has built some credibility, at least with probation, when it comes time to talk about realignment. Now, with respect to realignment, the first question is, what is it we're going to realign? And it's difficult, frankly, to realign into what I described as a broken system. If you're going to put more breakage into an already broken system, it's not going to give you the results that you're hoping for. So what we've said, whether you're talking about realigning parole services or whatever the case may be, is we have to get a fundamental base first that functions before we can look at doing something beyond that. So, is realignment potentially something that benefits the state and locals? Certainly, there are some constructs out there where I could see that being the case. It depends on what we're talking about, what the financing mechanism comes down to, and certainly the resources. Your last comment that I would respond to with respect to giving locals the opportunity to tax themselves or raise revenue. My fear with that is that you will set up a system where you will have haves and have-nots. I come from the Central Valley. We're foreclosure capital of the country and things like that. There's no funds to, even if my board had the inclination to do, which they don't, you don't have a populace who is readily able to come up with local funds. Forget about for probation. For the most compelling things. So the concept of allowing counties or local jurisdictions to raise revenues for these types of things might work in some areas, but I suspect that you would have some disparate opportunities happening out there. In some areas, they may be well financed, and in others, you're not going to have it. And as we know, that kind of turns into a vicious cycle. They become less likely because I'm going to move over here where I can, we can have the conversation whether it be school financing or public safety financing and things like that. So.
And I only bring that up because of your last comment, is realignment being a dirty word, that we give you the responsibility without the money.
Right.
We could do both, but in this economic environment, and at least the experience in the Bay Area is poor people are more willing to tax themselves or pay higher fees than wealthier people.
Well, in realign, and I guess what I would say, coming from my perspective, my local perspective, is if you realign it and say, here's your authority to raise the money to pay for it, I personally would not be in favor of that. If you're going to realign and say, here's the money to pay for it, that's a discussion that I think is easier to have. Because as a chief probation officer, I don't have the ability to raise the money.
Right.
It's out of my control, and it really lies with the policymakers and the citizens of the county. So that's a little scary too. That concept's a little scary too.
Well, in regards to your department, of the history of 172, I can see where you would be hesitant, because in 172 it was the sheriffs and the police departments who got those funds generally on probation.
I do in my county. I get a portion of the funds.
Congratulations. Hold on to it.
I know. It's an annual tightrope that we walk. In many counties, probation, it does not receive any of that money. You're absolutely correct.
Could I just comment
Yes,
on the realignment, and using a little differently the term reentry and transition, rather than considering moving directly to a realignment, which I share Jerry's concerns, is I think it would make more sense at the outset to partner, to work, consolidate and work together to join resources and to develop local strategies together and be a team. And then if realignment is in the forecast, then there would be a transitional opportunity in time, because we can't just stop something and just pick it up. I just think that it makes more sense to utilize what we have available, but just start working more effectively together.
And I guess my only comment to that, I agree with all of that, but whatever you call it, the system's going to change.
Yes.
And it's and as you've all testified, it's in a change line that is worse for all accountability, particularly because we can't afford it. So whatever we call it, we should work together to make sure the change is effective as possible. I'm sorry it takes so long. Other committee members? Mr. Furtado.
As you talk about the issue of skin in the game, and you sort of answered the question I had at the local level, if people are, the electeds, the ones that have the control over the budget, are cutting back. So that's less money for probation. Less money for probation if you're not getting it from the state, who's having trouble with trying to take care of the middle part of the continuum of incarcerating everybody and paying for all the needs we have with those in the prisons. It seems that realignment or localizing the issue, if you're oversubscribed, there's too many in the local prisons and local county jails, there's too many in the state prisons. It just seems that it's a tough way to try to make this work any way you cut it, if there's too many people everywhere in terms of those who need to be serviced.
I would say I agree, and I would say if I had a crystal ball, and I'll make a prediction, that as this coming budget year and next budget year gets implemented locally, if probation services are significantly reduced or in some instances gutted, and I'm speaking about adult probation services, I think you're going to see that trend line increase. In other words, you're going to see more commitments to state prison, because you're going to have judges that, instead of seeing an individual for a dirty drug test, are going to see that same individual, because there was no probation supervision or threat of being seen by a probation officer. The dirty drug test, the drug test is never given, and what you're going to see is they're going to be arrested for a residential burglary, first degree, and end up going to prison. So you're going to see, instead of technical violations resulting in local sanctions, jail time, whatever, that you're going to see criminal violations that will result in state prison commitment. So, I don't want to be doom and gloom,
You're a chief probation officer. You get to be doom and gloom.
Not being a betting man either, but if I had to put my coin on one side or the other, knowing how local budgets are, I'd say that we're going to see some increases in those types of offenders coming into the prison system.
But there also are opportunities for partnerships at the local level, not just like, for example, parole and probation I was speaking of. Our line officers have been hit dramatically and have had major cuts as well. So it's across our system, but we do have in Sacramento County, and I'm sure we're not alone, we have a variety of examples where actually cops and probation officers team up together. And that's a very effective model, so you get a combination of effort there, because you need to have the first line of response, which are your cops on the street, but when you team them up with probation, it gets to be very effective.
If I could just add, I think what is kind of brilliant about SB 678 is, first of all, it doesn't just shove offenders back and forth between state and local government. You know, it is a commitment to recidivism reduction. The commitment is to reducing crime, so you have fewer offenders. And it sets up a win-win situation with the state and local government, where you're not fighting back and forth, which is what happens with realignment. Everyone wins under SB 678. If probation is effective at reducing revocations and recidivism, the state saves $50,000 a year for each offender. They share half of those savings back to the county, so the county can do an even better job at reducing recidivism. And the state saves more money and sends back some of those savings on an annual basis. So everyone is committed to the success of this thing, because the state gets to keep half of the savings that probation is producing, and probation gets to keep half of the savings that result to the state. And so you have both the state and local government working together to reduce recidivism, as opposed to passing failure back and forth and trying to fight over who's going to get stuck with the failure. So that's why I think that the financial reinvestment model, which is SB 678, reinvesting in success, so it's a win-win, is a better model than realignment, which is trying to shove off a problem to somebody else.
Where does the capital investment come from, to use your analogy?
Well, in this case,
Because you're underfunded already on the front end in the probation department. You don't have the resources. Locally, people are dealing with their budget problems just like we are at the state level. Where does the infusion of the dollars to get the system where they can in fact do the job, so then you can have the savings you're talking about?
in the case of SB 678, you mandated that the federal burn justice assistance grant funds coming to California, that $45 million of those federal funds coming to California be given to probation to jumpstart the process. So that was the genius of it, was using, there's not one dime of California general fund money in SB 678 at the outset. You funded it with federal money to jumpstart it, producing a state savings, which you then split with probation in a win-win situation.
And the key part to that is to jumpstart it, to start it. Whether it's sustainable or not is how we implement it.
Right.
And
it's priming the pump. Essentially what it's doing is hopefully once you get the water flowing, it increases because you take that savings and use it. Right. What I would say, just to make it clear, and I've talked to most of the chiefs in the state, this funding is not seen by the probation officers around the state as a full employment program for strictly probation officers. This is flexible funding that can be used for community-based organizations. It can be used for frontline law enforcement. It can be used for probation. Whatever works, the evidence-based programs that you're going to do in your county, it gives you the flexibility within your individual county. If you're a rural county, maybe this program is more suited than if you're an urban county. So it really is, I'll call it genius, but it's very open and flexible funding to this point. The problem, and I touched on it, is essentially we've got 3 years. We're going to spend about $15 to $20 million per year, and if you think from a statewide basis, that's really not a whole lot. So it's going to start with a trickle. It's not going to come gushing. The changes aren't going to be quick on it, but hopefully that trickle turns into a drip, turns into a small stream, and we get to build. The danger is that if we cut the foundation underneath probation at the local level, then the 678, frankly, is not going to give us the results that we're hoping.
Well, which has been our history, is that then you're forced to supplant those funds,
Exactly.
and it's not sustainable. Then you come back, the economy gets better, you come back to us or your local government, or the federal government always leaves after the grant period's
Right.
done. You do all the right stuff, but you have to supplant funds and you're in crisis mode, and then when you get through the grant, the program goes away, even though you did everything as it was designed.
And frankly, in 2 years, when $45 million is gone, and because the infrastructure that we had envisioned isn't there anymore, we won't have the reduction in prison commitments that will provide us any money. So as you said, 2 years, bang, that money dries up. We haven't reduced the prison commitment rate, and so we have no new money coming in. And then you have these programs that have just started to really hit their stride, go poof.
Right. Now, on that cheery note, anyone else with any questions or comments? Well, I want to thank all three of you, and in addition to your testimony, we may send, if you have any suggestions as we further this discussion, of course, we use you as a resource. Also, as this panel leaves, I want to thank Senator Grady McLeod for correcting my English. She said, irregardless is not a word, irrespective, or as my younger son would say, whatever. All right, the next panel. This is panel number 3, Options for Improving Operations and Outcomes. And we have former Secretary Woodford, formerly the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, much respected expert in this field. Barry Chrisberg, who's a distinguished senior fellow in residence at UC Berkeley School of Law. Cindy Greer, the academic instructor of the Valley State Prison for Women. And Maurice Law, Senior Vice President for the Western Region of West Care. And we will start with Secretary Woodford. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we'll go back to the attempt at the 5 minutes, but I couldn't stop a retired judge, so.
And I'll try to keep my comments to 5 minutes. Good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank both chairs and members of the committee. I'm Jeannie Woodford. I'm the former warden at San Quentin State Prison, the former director of the California Department of Corrections, the former undersecretary of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and for a short time, the acting secretary. I retired as the chief of adult probation for the city and county of San Francisco. So I've had the opportunity to look at criminal justice from all angles over my 30-year career. And I continue to be passionate about the need to reform corrections in California. I continue to believe strongly that we can reduce the cost of corrections and improve public safety. For too long, our response to crime has been to spend more on building prisons and paying for the cost of incarceration. Our focus has been punishment, retribution, and incapacitation while ignoring rehabilitation and restoration of not only victims but also communities and the offender. I think we often forget that we parole around 10,000 people a month in the state of California, and we also forget that what happens in our prisons matters. As people leave prison cells and return home, we should ask, what have we done to prepare people for reentering our society? Have they been properly prepared to contribute to society and make better decisions? Making an investment in their future is, in fact, making an investment in ours. It is the best form of crime prevention. I strongly believe that we must reform our sentencing laws to achieve better outcomes and reduce cost. I know I was not asked here today to talk about sentencing reform, but I must tell you that in these difficult budget times, we are wasting so much money driving offenders from county jails to reception centers where they parole, having not spent one moment in any kind of program, and without any serious thought given to their return back to our society or any kind of meaningful discussion about reentry. I call this the most expensive bus ride to nowhere in the state of California. We can and we should do better. Today we are here to discuss what programs work and promising practices in an effort to improve outcomes and reduce the cost of corrections. I do appreciate the discussion, but I must admit that I believe we know what works and we know what reforms are necessary in our state. We've had over 15 expert panel reports, and we have paid millions of dollars from experts all around the country to tell us what works. And in these 15 reports, I will give you a short synopsis of the top 10 recommendations that have been included in all 15 reports. Number 1, stop sending nonviolent, non-serious offenders to prison. It's very expensive, and it does little good, and they're there for such a short period of time. About 69% of new commitments spend less than 12 months in our state prison system. Once in prison, use a risk and needs assessment tool to match resources with needs. Number 3, develop and implement more and better work, education, and substance abuse treatment programs. Number 4, reform the determinate sentencing law to reward prisoners for participation in rehabilitative programs and allow the system to keep offenders who do and continue to pose a risk to public safety. Number 5, move low-risk prisoners to community-based facilities. Number 6, my favorite, create a sentencing commission. Number 7, reform California's parole system so that non-serious parole violators are handled in community-based intermediate facilities and more violent offenders are prosecuted for new crimes. I've had inmates tell me the best time to commit a crime is when you're on parole because you'll serve about 4 months. Number 8, create viable partnerships between state and local correctional agencies. Number 9, evaluate all programs and require that existing and newly funded programs are based on solid research and evidence. Number 10, promote public awareness so that taxpayers know what they are getting for their public safety investment. I personally treat these 10 recommendations as a package deal. As an example, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation currently utilizes a risk and needs assessment tool, but there must be resources available to address the needs of the offender, and those resources must be evidence-based, with proof of appropriate implementation and outcomes. Knowing the risk and knowing the needs and then doing nothing with the information is not a good use of our money, nor does it emphasize prevention. This example covers recommendations 2, 3, and 9. To reduce the cost of corrections and improve public safety and prevent further victimization, you cannot ignore any of the recommendations. With that being said, I'm here today to talk primarily about our failure to implement successful programs and the lack of accountability for implementation and outcomes. The CDCR can and should be required to present evidence that proposed or existing education plans or drug treatment programs are evidence-based at your request. There are currently effective models all around the country, and I know Barry will talk about that when he speaks. You will notice that I'm not using the term promising practices in this part of my presentation because in my mind, we need to focus on what we know works. And in this state, the term promising practices is being applied to experimental programs that have been developed because of budget cuts. In my humble opinion, we have abandoned implementing programs that work in order to save money in the short term when we should be focused on what will save us money not only in this budget year, but in future budget years as well. The quality of our programs matter. For the short time I was the Undersecretary and Acting Secretary in 2006, I set a goal for the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. It was the vision for the department to focus on and to achieve. Just as President Kennedy said he would put a man on the moon in 10 years without knowing exactly how that would be accomplished, he knew without a vision, without a goal, and a time frame, we would never get there. My vision, my mission, was to reduce recidivism by 10% by 2010. 10 by 10. I expected to see it on bumper stickers, T-shirts, and anything that we had on. Imagine if we had stayed with that vision and achieved it. We'd have a different discussion today. It really was a modest goal. When I called researchers around the country and asked if it was doable, they said absolutely. Having a goal focuses the efforts of everyone involved. I believe it is what is necessary to keep people focused on rehabilitation and reentry. Without a goal and without the legislature holding the department accountable, meaning the Department of Corrections, I fear we will continue to fail in implementing what works. And I can give you examples of that when it's time for questions. It takes all employees inside a prison, from the correctional officer on the ground, as I was in 1978, to the warden, as I was in 1999 through 2004, to change the culture of a prison and to implement programs and change. I believe strongly that the legislature must expect the Department of Corrections to set a recidivism reduction goal and should hold individuals accountable for appropriate and regular reporting of program participation and outcomes. I know my time to speak is limited, so I will close with this. Without goals and accountability, we will never improve implementation of programs or public safety in this state. nor will we reduce the cost of corrections. The purpose of prison cannot continue to be punishment only. It is time to get serious about reform. We must use what we know about corrections to improve public safety. The R in the CDCR should not be silent. Thank you very much.
Great presentation. We'll go back to those bumper stickers, maybe 20% in 2015. How's that? Mr. Chrisberg, welcome.
Thank you. I'm here today in a unique role speaking on behalf of President Mark Yudof of the University of California System. President Yudof believes that UC's mission as a world-class research institution is to develop ideas and recommendations to benefit both the people and the government of the state of California. In light of that mission, the University Office of the President has assembled a distinguished task force on corrections reform that will be chaired by Berkeley Law Dean Christopher Edley and staffed by the Berkeley Center of Criminal Justice. This task force is composed of leading experts across the state and from around the nation. Virtually every UC campus has a high-caliber criminal justice research center, and the task force is the first attempt, as far as I know, since I've been in California, to actually try to bring this resource together in some meaningful way. I've included a packet for you which names the members of that task force. I don't want to go into it at this point. As our first task, we are reviewing some of the reports that Jeannie Woodford mentioned, as well as summaries of sentencing legislation put together by the National Conference of State Legislators and other reports. What we intend to do is to go through that list, and very much in light of what your staff has suggested, begin to develop a short list of high priority reforms which are solidly backed by research, and translate that into those that can produce short-term, medium-term, and long-term fiscal benefits to the state, and also with attention to issues of implementation, which are obviously critical. The task force does not attempt to do an in-depth analysis of political feasibility, although we certainly feel that we don't want this to be an academic exercise, and we understand that political feasibility is important, but we think first and foremost we can help you by focusing in on what the evidence really is. We'll be consulting with a number of stakeholders in the criminal justice system, and we're ready and interested to listen to their input. We also really want to work with the legislature, because in many respects we're interested in taking our guidance from you, not just issue another report, but do what you will find helpful, pick topics that you will find most important, and that is our commitment. In the end, we're going to produce recommendations which will not, by necessity, be the formal institutional position of the University of California, but will represent recommendations of some of the key researchers across this state and across this nation. Now, I think this is a particularly exciting development in light of the conversation that we've had in earlier panels about evidence-based practices, because what I think the university, first and foremost, is offering to you are individuals who know something about research evidence, who can really vet these claims and give you an honest and objective view of what is evidence-based and what isn't. In terms of areas that we're looking at already, I just want to list some of the topics that have emerged in our conversations. Certainly, we're interested in the issue of earned good time credit, and I'm going to get back to that in a minute, as a way of managing the prison population. We're looking at expanded reentry programming and what constitutes effective parole supervision. We are looking at the appropriate allocation of state and local resources, including sustainable funding for both levels of government. We're interested in examining and providing information back to the legislature on what is the evidence in terms of improving offender literacy, job skills, mental health services, and substance abuse treatment. We are very interested in providing evidence-based information on gender-responsive programming. We would like to offer help, again, based on the evidence and the research on what expanded sentencing options for nonviolent offenders actually make sense. And finally, we would like to be the objective source to look at the pros and cons of privatization in our correctional system. Since we may not have skin in the game, but we also don't have a dog in the fight. And I think this is important. So we've established this group. It is moving forward, and you're going to expect to hear more of this. Now, if I can quickly, I want to switch over to this issue of earned good time credit. Since the panel before spoke almost exclusively about admissions to prison and alternatives to that, it is equally true. In fact, it's more the case that significant savings can be achieved if one can safely address length of stay. And what I wanted to do just briefly is to suggest that the research is pretty clear that safe reductions in length of stay can be achieved. In my former life at the National Council on Crime Delinquency, we did a literature review covering studies from Canada and 14 states over the last 30 years, looking at a variety of things that states had done to accelerate release. And the bottom line was, in no instance in any of those studies, which were all done by objective researchers, did we find any significant compromising of public safety. But some of those studies are kind of old, from the 80s and what have you. And so what I wanted to kind of end with is to suggest that the evidence continues to mount. The Pew Trust just produced a study of Mississippi's parole reform process. Was put out fairly recently. Governor Haley Barbour and the Mississippi legislature, faced with an extraordinary growth in the prison population, instituted a policy to accelerate parole grants. Pew helped fund the research on that, and the research is very clear that there was a very small return to prison rate. So they could safely, in this case, release almost 3,000 prisoners from Mississippi prisons and not pay a public safety price. The state of Washington has just done a very rigorous study of an earned good time credit study coming out of the Washington Institute for Public Policy, which is really the gold standard around the country in evidence-based program, and one thing that we hope to someday create here in California. Again, a very rigorous, very carefully done study of a 203 earned income study showed essentially no increase in recidivism, low failure rates, no negative impact on public safety in Washington state. Ditto the state of Delaware. The state of Delaware similarly expanded good time credits, did a very careful research study involving, again, a couple thousand inmates, and found, again, using really first-class scientific methods, no adverse effect. The people who were released earlier actually did better than the people who served their regular terms. And last but not least, I would refer to you a study completed in 2009 in Michigan from the Citizens Alliance on Prisons and Public Spending, a very good study which looked at the public safety benefit of basically not paroling people at their first parole date, but keeping them on for a longer period of time. This study basically showed that over a 10-year period, Michigan had accomplished minimal benefits in terms of public safety by not presumptively paroling people at their first term. So again, the evidence is mounting, and I do not know of a single study where release has been modestly accelerated, done properly with good risk assessment, et cetera, that's compromised public safety. So certainly I think this is something for the future that the legislature needs to look at. And again, this is, in my mind, an example of how the university can help by sticking to the research, sticking to the data, and presenting you an objective view of what is out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kussberg. And I will say that you do have skin in the game, and Mr. Udoff knows that, because there's a direct relationship by our costs in the Department of Corrections and our ability to fund the University of California. Cindy, welcome. Next, we're going to hear from Cindy Greer, who's an academic instructor at the Valley State Prison for Women. Welcome.
Thank you. I was so excited when we got rehabilitation put on our title, and I truly am a teacher at heart and have chosen never to promote because I want to help our population. And they have taught me so much, and I feel like we're failing them with what we're doing, and so I'd like to go through a few of the things that have been happening. You can see that I've taught every academic program within the institutions in all levels of reading ability, and currently I'm teaching the adult high school diploma program, and I do want to thank the department. They did see it in their best interest to let us continue at institutions that have the high school program, so I'm going to be able to get some more graduates for the system. But they didn't have, and they don't have in place, where you can easily get a student from one program to the other as they advance. They can go back to classification, but it takes a lot of paperwork. It takes forever. A lot of individual teachers take it on themselves to work with the other teachers, try to get some inter-department transfers done. So I know several of my graduates, I got into what was the IYO program, the Incarcerated Youth Offender, which is now the Incarcerated Individual Program, which is a federally funded teacher that helps with college programs and help them a year into their parole. It's a type of program that lifts them up a little bit more than we've ever done, and it's an excellent program. I wish we could talk federal out some more funds to do more of those positions. So I make sure that my students that are eligible get into that program, and at the same time, because they do that independent study, try to get them into vocational programs. So that has been done on my own. There's no making sure that that happens through the system, and so we've not utilized the resources that we've had in the best way possible. Another example of that is on the front end when they come into the reception center. We're supposed to be assessing them now. We still aren't making sure that we find out if they have their high school or GED, their diploma or their GED. They ask them, the counselors now to ask them, and we've already had an issue where they say, oh no, I don't have it, and we don't check on it. And I know it's time consuming and takes some effort to do that, but we've had some folks who then take the GED test and then get the milestones credits to get out early, because there's 6 weeks they can get out early if they pass the GED, only to come find out later that, oh, they already had a prior GED. So we're moving fast to these milestone credits. We're moving fast to trying to make differences to save money, and we're running into some pitfalls, and that's one of them. Another one is that the GED testing now at the institutions, because of that happening, is only being done in the education department, only those students who are receiving educational services. At Valley State Prison, where I work, 60% of our GEDs came from inmates in the general population. They didn't even come from within the education department. So now every one of those GEDs that we get would get us Workforce Investment Act funds. That's not happening. We're going to lose a lot of benchmarks because we're only going to be getting roughly about 40% of the GEDs that we had. Another problem with the closure of half of the VOC programs is that we've got, this is a list of printing equipment, over $5 million worth just in one program of printing equipment sitting idle. And if you talk to the wardens at the various prisons, the categorical spending for their printing costs, of course, are going to go through the roof by next budget when you compare that categorical spending, because a lot of the printing was done by the students who cost, there's no inmate funds paid to them, it's a learning experience, and we got a lot of materials done for the prisons. My recommendation has been from the get-go to do regional, close some of them down, but at least keep them going regionally so we could still keep categorical funds down for the rest of the printing costs for the institutions. We had TAs. They were going to hire 335 teaching assistants, and then the department wisely backed that down to 100 to 150. This allowed CDCR to save about a little over 60 teaching positions. 33 of those positions have been designated to be literacy coordinators, which is an interesting position. I actually have gotten to where I like the sounds of it somewhat. It's an overburdening duty statement. I think there's some kinks that can be worked out, but that person is going to have a lot on their shoulders. There's been some notices go out to the reinstatement list, some folks on that there's some positions coming up. I assume it's for those literacy coordinators, but it would be nice to know when they're going to be in place. That leaves over 30, or right at 30 other positions that we don't know where they're going. We're being told that they're being held back until after implementation of the models to see where the most need is. I don't understand that. Every institution has waiting lists with populations. We know who has ABE1 waiting lists and ABE2 waiting lists. I don't understand why they're holding back on those 30 positions. We gave the Sergeant of Arms a background packet, so you would have, it's my famous marshmallow presentation showing how different our workloads are now, and I'm not whining about paperwork. I just want to have some time to teach, and that's virtually been taken from us. I am going to give it all I've got. I do love the population I work with, so I'm not here to say, hey, it's all bad. I'm going to say I'm going to try to make it work, but we really need to listen to the two prior speakers and some of the suggestions they've had, especially to make sure that evidence base is research driven. I do think we can use our resources better. Some of the problems that have happened with the new model implementation, some of the institutions don't have the curriculum or the books necessary. They've been ordered. I don't know why they're not on site, but Calipatria and Mule Creek do not have the resources they need. And I begged last Thursday afternoon for more time because Tuesday I was given the rosters of who was going to be in my class, one of the few institutions to get them early to know who I was going to have. I have a model that has 108 students, 4 groups of 27 coming at different times of the day. It's model number 3 if you look in your handout. So my printer only prints so fast, and to get that many job descriptions done, the permanent class records, it was very difficult because Wednesday was a complete day of training. So I begged on Thursday afternoon for another day to at least do some lesson planning. They said, no, we're starting. Well, then Monday came and we got our daily movement sheets from over the weekend, and we got our first class there, which thankfully was my high school students, so most of them were returning and they knew what to do, get books and go to work and don't question Miss Greer because she was in over her head with paperwork. At break, one of the teachers said, did you see the daily movement sheet? Did you see how many changes? And I said, what? Changes, we just got started. And they said, you better look. And just what's highlighted in yellow were changes just Monday to my programs. This isn't any of the others. So that means all the work I did to get ready was for naught. So I'm starting again on 2 classes, the GED classes. The reason there's an issue with the GED classes is the Office of Correctional Education told each institution which number of models you're going to have at each site. They didn't look at the population. They didn't say, oh, you need more of these, you need more of these. They said, here's what you're going to start with. We don't have enough GED students to fill the 3 number 4 models that we were given at Valley State Prison. That's 120 GED students per instructor, so that's 360. So they have just given teachers like 6 each PM and AM so that they have some students. And they said that the principals can resubmit now new changes and ask for different models. And if they're approved, then those teachers are going to be unassigned all their students and start again. So we're really feeling like we're shuffling students like you are a deck of cards right now. And I understand that there's supposed to be some startup issues and things going on, but so much of this could have been avoided if we'd been more proactive in looking where our populations were instead of being, oh, we've been cut, we've got to do this, this is what we're going to do. We have issues with the noon meds taking inmates out of their PM classes for about an hour. It's a custody issue because they can only get their meds at certain times, so we're not getting them 3 hours of class in the afternoon. Again, we had half our voc programs cut, half our academic programs cut, and I totally agree with Dr. Chrisberg that we need to look at what works, and this Washington Institute of Public Policy, we need to be talking to these folks. They do have what's going on, and they show number 1 and number 3, the savings with VOC first, and then number 3 is educational programs on page 27 of that really nicely done handout. The milestone chronos are adding to our workload, which again, I'm not trying to complain. I'm just saying that this change of how many students we have with the controlled movement is very, very difficult. And it is so sad that our program, substance abuse and education, only took 1%, less than 1% of the budget, and that we had to take these hard savings. Since education cost actually is savings long term, it's still just beyond. I'm still in shock. I'm sorry. I really am in shock. We're going to lose a lot of funds now federally because of the loss of benchmarks for those GEDs, those high school diplomas, and the less teachers to test and get everything done. In closing, I just want to say what helps me is to know that I do make a difference. And I say that because I had an inmate clerk that worked for me for almost 2 years helping me set up my high school program, because it takes a lot of work and getting it set up was pretty tedious. She paroled and she gave back her number, and we agreed to be friends after that, and we have been for over 3 years now. And I got to spend Mother's Day with her along with my daughter. And she has a little network of a bunch that have gotten out that are still on parole, so I can't have contact with them. But I know, because I get to talk to her and see her, and know that there are so many. We keep hearing of high recidivism, and she helps me put a face and a lot of personalities to. We do help, and I come up here and I hear all these numbers, all these graphs, all these figures, and it gets to be non-human to me, and I want to keep reminding you that we do make a difference. And Kelly and Kim and Burton and all of these others, Christy, that are just doing wonderfully, of all the women that I know. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for all that all of you do, and I know we need to work through this together, but please listen to our recommendations too, and we'll continue to give them.
Thank you, Ms. Greer. Thank you for your long career. Our next and last speaker on this panel, Maurice Lee, Senior Vice President for Western Region West Care. Mr. Lee.
Thank you and good afternoon. For the record, Maurice Lee, Senior Vice President for West Care. I'm also an officer for California Therapeutic Communities. Over the years, I've helped facilitate and activate several of the in-prison substance abuse programs with West Care. We also operate the SASCA, or the Substance Abuse Service Coordinating Agency for Region 1, which encompasses Bakersfield up to the Oregon border, which deals with all the releases of the inmates going into aftercare. On top of that, I'm a father of 6 kids. Okay, I'm a taxpayer. I'm a tithe payer in church. I'm a community activist. I'm a contributing member of society. But 23 years ago, I was being released out of Leavenworth Prison to the state of New York. And because the state of New York made an investment in me, took the time to put the resources behind me, and I know this isn't about me, but it's about people like me, that I've been able to become a contributing member of society. And if we fail to realize that you could have been taking care of me in any state, USA, for the past 23 years, taking care of my kids, taking care of my wife, and paying for the crime and devastation that I would have caused over those 23 years. So often when we look for where the money's at, I ask you to count the costs. As you're aware, there have been major reductions to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's Substance Abuse Treatment Initiative that have had a significant impact on services in the prisons and in the community alike. These reductions pose a threat to public safety and are already resulting in the loss of valuable treatment capacity and the closure of community-based programs that have taken over a decade to build. On July 1, 2009, there were over 12,000 treatment slots in CDCR. As of today, there are approximately 2,000. CDCR, faced with the need to make necessary yet drastic front-end budget reductions, made the decision to shorten treatment episodes for in-prison capacity slots by increasing the number of inmates placed through the in-prison substance abuse program system. OSATs, in spite of the Office of Substance Abuse Treatment Services, in spite of their valiant efforts to make this system operate effectively, has been burdened with reductions at the staff levels to help facilitate a system in flux. The manpower previously utilized to help classify, review files, track placement, and perform tasks essential to the continuum of care is now absent. The in-prison SAP reductions, while helping to balance the budget for the moment, has eliminated the possibility of long-term cost savings, as fewer inmates will receive incentives or reductions in sentences for participation in programs for early discharge from parole. For the completion of two of our most successful programs, our drug treatment furlough program and our SB 1453 program. Now those incentives are gone. We have experienced a severe drop-off of enrollments in in-prison SAP programs and consequently a drop in our aftercare placements as a result. The closure of 21 in-prison substance abuse programs in and of itself was enough to stall the aftercare referral process. The dilemma is only compounded by the elimination of DTF funding and significant revisions to SB 1453, as it has had an immediate impact on the number of inmates eligible for aftercare services in the community and early discharge from parole. It has been estimated that the DTF and SB 1453 programs resulted in annual savings over $22 million annually to the state of California. There are already signs of the lower referral rates to aftercare from in-prison SAPs that have resulted in the closure of 7 community-based reentry facilities in Region 1 alone. When you look at the whole state across all 4 regions, which includes, L.A. and San Bernardino County and San Diego and some of your major metropolises like San Francisco, that number goes up astronomically. Many of the agencies are in major metropolitan areas where large percentages of inmates are paroled annually. This creates public safety concerns and undoubtedly impacts local law enforcement in terms of the increase in county jail population. Please note that as these community-based reentry facilities close, they risk the loss of their conditional use permits granted for treating parolees. Once this capacity is gone, it will virtually be impossible to replicate a system that has taken over a decade to build. I feel that all inmates should be released on parole. All inmates that are being released on parole should be eligible for treatment services. It has been shown that if services are available for parolees, they will utilize them. The in-custody drug treatment program that was created as a result of the Valdivia lawsuit has a statewide capacity of 1,800 beds and is consistently utilized. This has demonstrated that if there are services available, parolees will use them. We support that the any door is the right door policy for parolees that are in the community. Allowing the substance abuse treatment system to function in the most flexible and productive way possible within the limits of the funding constraints is in the best interest of the state and of CDCR and its efforts to increase the numbers of those who, with appropriate treatment, will not return the lives of substance abuse and crime, will not continue to draw on the resources of the criminal justice system, will not return to swell the numbers of the California prisons, and will not victimize California citizens. And imposing arbitrary administrative limits on whom and who may not receive these services will seriously hamper the substance abuse treatment system and its efforts to achieve their goals. Although funding availability will not allow for all who want service to receive them, many inmates and parolees with substance abuse problems can continue to be served under a revised plan. A proposed plan will prioritize those receiving services according to the following order, but would, insofar as funding permits, make those reentry and recovery services available to all who qualify. 1, the inmates eligible to receive substance abuse services in the community setting such as ICDTP. Parolees who elect to receive such services as a way to shorten their length of parole, such as 1453 and DTF. Parolees who recently graduated from in-prison substance abuse program. One of the dilemmas is we closed these SAP programs. We already had an investment in these inmates. We had already, some of them had been in program for some time who would then return to general population and have not transitioned into aftercare, which would have probably given us our best bang for our buck. General population parolees who did not have an opportunity to participate in in-prison treatment programs, and individuals who leave prison on or who have been transferred to summary parole. One of the dilemmas with summary parole is that as an inmate, if you tell me that you're going to let me out and I'm not going to be on parole, the first thing I'm going to say is thank you. I don't have supervision to the extent that I need supervision, I'm going to take that. But that isn't a decision that's in my best interest because I need services. And with summary parole, the detachment from services occurs, and I don't have the wherewithal to make the right decision for myself. And I think that we, as a state, need to make that decision in the best interest of not only the inmates, but as our citizens and taxpayers. In closing, I just want to say that there's been several documents that have been circulated through the CTC to members of this body that I would be more than willing to present again, that outlines several different options as to how we can, revise this system to make it a more efficient system. And with that, I close.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Do we have any questions or comments from the panel?
Just real quick.
Assemblymember Furtan.
Just in this panel alone, the issue of looking at data and best practices, and then based upon that, making policy decisions and program decisions, then as a result of that, hopefully have some success. And what I'm seeing, though, if I understand correctly, particularly the presentation about education and the aftercare issue once they get out and are on parole, we have all this data that shows if we have these programs, that's where hopefully success lies, but all of these programs have been cut last year, correct? So what was the basis of the cut? Was it just merely to save money? Is that what drove the agenda, basically? I mean...
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Lewis will be coming up later. We can ask him that question.
Good, thank you.
The cuts were unallocated and taken to our services, education and substance abuse. And so we still have programs, but the way they're figured now and what they're expecting to be done with less is overwhelming, and we will not get the results that we were getting before, and we couldn't get the department to follow them and give us tracking like the IYO program did, like we've been asking for since I've been working there. So we need to do a much better job of oversight and looking at what works and sticking with it to get the results we need.
And if I could comment just on summary parole, for example, I'm a consultant on a grant that was given to San Francisco from the federal government, and in that grant we had to make a commitment to reduce recidivism by 10% first year, 20% second year, 30% third year for women returning to San Francisco from the Department of Corrections. And we were concerned about getting referrals to our new program that we're just implementing. And many of the referrals have been self-referrals from women leaving prison on summary parole because they didn't have any services. So I do think that many of the inmates leaving our prisons know they need help and are looking for services, and we're just fortunate in San Francisco to have this funding to be able to provide that to women.
What's the source of that funding?
It's the federal Second Chance grant.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? There are two really interesting things following up on Assemblymember Furutani's question. On page 15 of your report, staff references a 2004 report from UCLA, and just quote briefly, this report finds that investment of $1 million in correctional education prevents about 600 crimes, while that same money invested in incarceration prevents about $350 in crimes. And on page 22, there's some really good information from the department, actually, on substance abuse. There's 85% of the inmates have a substance abuse problem, and if they get programs, they're 72% more likely not to violate their parole because of substance abuse. So, again, we've done a lot of work in this area. Any other questions or comments for this panel? Thank you all very much. That was terrific. And with that, I will turn it over to my co-chair to see if he can help you follow the 5-minute rule.
Thank you, Mark. We would like to call panel 4 on options for improving reentry and parole and reducing recidivism. Susan Turner from UC Irvine Center for Evidence-Based Corrections, Carolyn Eagleson, Director of CSU San Bernardino Center for Correctional Education, Diane Boudreau, Parole Agent, Parole Region 3, and Reverend Raymond Langford, Executive Director for Healthy Oakland. Welcome and thank you for your participation today. And who's the leadoff batter here? I believe Ms. Turner.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, chairs and members of the committee. My name is Susan Turner. I'm a professor at the University of California, Irvine in Criminology, Law, and Society. I also direct a center there, the Center for Evidence-Based Corrections, in which we do a number of research projects in collaboration with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I'm also a member of California Rehabilitation Oversight Board, and I think I'm on the task force, the UC task force that Barry Chrisberg mentioned. I think some of my comments will echo some of the information that the others have mentioned before this panel, and I guess that's one of the things that happens when you get your homework assignment and you're fourth in the panels. There's a little bit of repetition. But I think it's important to repeat some of the information that was given. And one of the first points I'd like to make is that there's no dearth of advice for what California should be doing in the Department of Corrections. As several people have mentioned, over the past 15 to 20 years, there have been a series of reports by the Little Hoover Commission, other independent commissions, the Duke-Majan Commission, and the 2007 expert panel report, and the subsequent strike team report. And what I find most interesting, and what I'll focus on first, is the expert panel report and the recommendations from the expert panel report on what the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation should be doing. That report was compiled by a number of nationwide experts, and it was based on evidence of effective programming. And the report had 11 key suggestions, which sound very similar in many ways to what Jeannie just mentioned in her 10 recommendations. The report recommended reduce the overcrowding in prison facilities, stop sending nonviolent, non-serious offenders to prison, particularly for technical violations, select and utilize a risk assessment tool to address an offender's risk to reoffend, and this should be used for all offenders, determine offender rehabilitation programming based on the results of assessment tools that identify and measure risk and needs, create and develop a behavior management or case plan for each offender, and case plans are critical for assigning offenders to the proper program at the proper time. Select and deliver a core set of programs for offenders that cover major offender areas. And now you've heard from various folks here about education, substance abuse. These are key areas. Also vocational, anger management, criminal thinking, family members, family relationships, and programs for sex offenders. You should develop systems and procedures to collect and utilize programming process and outcome measures. Basically, this is information on evaluations to see what works, to see how well things are being implemented. And this will provide sort of benchmarks, maybe a ComStat kind of a system for the department to be able to see where there are problems, issues, and to develop mechanisms to improve the outcomes. Other things you've heard various people talk about, another component of the expert panel report was to continue to develop and strengthen formal partnerships with community stakeholders. These will improve coordination of transition services for offenders who move from prison to the community, another key area where things can fall down for offenders. And we need to modify community-based programs to ensure they target the crime patterns of offenders and meet their needs. We want to, in doing this, engage the members of the community in this effort. And the last one was to develop structured guidelines to respond to technical violations based on the risk of the offender and the seriousness of the offense. In this kind of violation guidelines, it's really important to consider both of the sanctions and incentives. The expert panel report had, as one of its main outcomes, was something that I have left for all of the members here, is a picture of the California logic model. It's a diagram that when you, I'm not going to go over it here, but if you take a look at it, it has the key components you've heard many people talk about here today. How to assess the needs, what kind of programs need to be developed for which programs, for which offender needs, where to deliver them, we have to manage them, and then we need to worry about them when they come into the community. And all of these are subject to a feedback loop to determine whether or not the programs are implemented as planned and they're implemented correctly. I think you hear that from Jeannie Woodford was mentioning that the programs really need to be good programs. We need to make sure that they work. But I want to step back a little bit and talk about particularly.
Excuse me, Ms.
Yeah.
Turner, you only have a couple more minutes.
Okay.
Could you wind this up, please?
All right. Okay.
We are going to hold to the 5-minute because we have other
All right.
people on the panel.
Okay. I want to just make three points. I think when we talk about parole reform, I think we need to think about 3 phases. What put them in prison in the first place in terms of our laws, and one of the things mentioned by Barry Chrisberg is maybe a consideration of sentencing guidelines and different structures for who goes in the front door. We need to think about making sure their prison experience itself is effective. We know which programs are effective. Washington State helps us know that by the costs and the benefits. We also know that we need to target offenders with the highest risk and needs, and we need to work on principles of risk, need, and responsivity. So we do know what works for effective programs in prison. And when we're in looking at parole, I think some of the important things we need to do and think about are things that are currently being considered. Parole violation decision-making instrument, which takes a look at the severity of the violations and the offender and makes a determination of which should go back to prison. Hopefully that can avert the number of returns to custody, one of the main drivers of our correctional population. And I would also recommend that people follow some recent guidelines, the 13 strategies for effective parole practices that were developed by folks from the Urban Institute, working with Pew, and there are a number of guidelines that you'll hear, if you read them, are ones that are echoed in other best practices as well. But involve supervision, monitoring, provision of services, and also using the community to help engage offenders. And lastly, what I'd like to say is that the CDCR and the state are doing a number of practices that are being tried across the country. Many other states are increasing the credits, the earned credits, which would help provide incentives while they're in prison, perhaps also improve parole performances. So what I would like to just basically end with is that there are a number of things that California has tried that are being tried elsewhere. And as Barry mentions, one of the things we need to make sure is that we get good information on how effective they are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Turner. Ms. Eggleston?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about my background so that it'll give you a context for my comments, not because it's very interesting, but because it'll give you a context. I actually started working in prisons early in my career as a teacher and then as a school principal. And so what we're trying to do at the Center for the Study of Correctional Education at Cal State is to try to marry theory and practice. And so that's sort of the context that I bring to my comments today. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the overall parole issues, but we've had quite a bit of good discussion about that, so I don't really want to repeat any of the discussion that's occurred. I do want to second most of the comments that were made because I think they have been quite accurate and right on target. But one of the things we found just recently was we know that we have a terrible problem in California parole. We know that we return over 50% of our prisoners to prison on parole, most of them for multiple times on an average of at least 4. What I hadn't known until recently, though, was in the United States, of all of the prisoners returned to prison from parole, 47% of those are from California. Now, I know we've got a lot of population in this state compared to some others, but for it to be almost half of the whole country, that's a lot of people returning to prison from parole. So it is a problem that we all can recognize. For those of us who have worked in institutions as well as been studying this for many, many years, it's clear that what happens in the institution must be supported in terms of programs when someone is released. It's not enough to just let people go and not have programs for them. So what I want to spend most of my time talking about is a project that we've been working on that we call CREST. And we call it CREST because it stands for Community Reintegration, Employment, Education, Services, and Training. So you can see why we would abbreviate it a little bit. We've been working in the community for going on 5 years to try to develop a collaborative that will approach some of the problems that we have in San Bernardino. We have a terrible problem with parolees coming back to our city, to our county. It's one of the most difficult counties and city seats, the county seats in the country, in the state. And so we recognized years ago that as a community we needed to try to do something that would help to address some of our problems. We came up with this idea of a community collaborative, and we've based it on the research that has been mentioned today, including the Little Hoover Commission, the expert panel report, and we're using the logic model as well to try to develop a program that brings in the best of evidence-based research into a community program. So what CREST is going to be doing, we're hoping, is really 3 different factors I want to discuss. It takes the work that has been done before in parole, in programs that are in the community, and tries to approach it from a more collaborative and independent way. We want to make sure to take the research and use it to develop our programs. So, for example, it's very individualized. We've learned that it's not appropriate to try to develop a program that is one size fits all. What we really need is to look at a program that addresses the individual needs of the parolee. So we assess risk factors, we assess individual needs, so that the program that we give them is actually something that they need. The research is clear that we can also do damage by offering the wrong kinds of programs. And so we need programs, but we need programs that are good for that individual. It is a collaborative that includes over 30 community programs. There are collaborations between the university, government, the mayor's office, all coming together to try to address the solutions to this problem. We really do expect that the CREST model will save the state money because it does reduce the percentage of people coming back. We expect to serve 1,000 parolees and 1,500 family members, because this is another piece of the picture that we want to include family reunification and family issues so that the person really does come back as a member of the community. One of the things that's most significant for us, and I hope for the rest of the state, is the CREST model can be replicated. There are over 12 counties that have at least 1,000 parolees. There are 8 counties that have 2,000 parolees, and there are 6 counties that have 3,000 parolees. So this is a problem that could be addressed in lots of different counties if we have the opportunity to try out some of these models in a community setting. We are very committed as a community. I had never seen a community that was so committed to trying to get together without pay, without any kind of remuneration, to develop this collaborative. And that's what makes it so exciting to me as a university person as well, because it is our community that has come together in this way. Toward the development... I
would ask you to conclude your remarks.
Yes, sir. Toward the development of this project, Senator Negrete McLeod has introduced Senate Bill 973 that will establish this project as a pilot. And so that's really one of the ways that we would like to try to proceed with this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Good afternoon, members, senators, assembly members. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Diane Boudreau. I'm a parole agent out of Region 3, the Inglewood Complex. I'm also a CCPOA union representative. Nothing stops a bullet like a job. And I'm going to piggyback on a few of the other panelists, especially when it comes to education. primary and foremost, if you're coming out to me and you're releasing, would you please have done something in correctional education, those vocational classes and academics that just got cut? No, you're coming back unskilled. I need you to come back with some basic skills. If you want to pursue higher education and you have the wherewithal to read those books and take those tests, that's wonderful. I want you to continue your education. But while you're locked up and there's 1,000 of you on that yard and you only have 3 classes to choose from because they just gutted everything from you, no, you want to reintegrate into society, you need a job. That being said, when you come to me, if it's possible for you to come with your California ID card, because for the most part, those who come to me are multi-termers, so you've been around before, you've been to DMV, you have your California ID card in the system. When you release 90 days before you hit the gate, take it off your trust account, take it off your gate money, and make sure you release with your California ID card. That lets you cash that check too, and it gives you proper ID in case you're anywhere up or down the state of California right away. Might not seem like a big thing, but it really is. It really is. You show up to the parole office. If you're not in the system, then we'll send you the reduced fee and send you to DMV. Your California ID card, staff can do it 90 days before release. Send that off. Food stamps, for those people that are in foreclosure capital of wherever they're at, you're paroling to neighborhoods, you're returning to our community. Our community is suffering. We already have joblessness and homelessness, and we're watching our own families go through foreclosure. The food stamp that denies access to drug offenders is punitive. We can give it to murderers and we can give it to petty theft with prior. I don't see it as being a deterrent to drug use, but they're coming home, and quite frankly, you're coming home, I'll let you post up for a couple weeks, but you got to go. They need to eat too. Food stamps is minimal. It's a federal program. Ex-offender parolee fire camp. We're running into fire season. Our inmates are vital fire crews, and they've demonstrated and proved their point. I just had somebody released show up in the office 1 week ago. Lieutenant gives them a wonderful report from fire camp, but there's no place to plug that service in because we're coming into fire season. California always used out-of-state fire crews. We recruit out-of-state fire crews to come fight our fires. But while we celebrate our inmate fire crews, what happens as they transition back into the community? It is seasonal work. Like everything, seasonal, it's seasonal. How can we bridge that, transition that, to have them that are coming right now that are good at their craft? They know something. They understand it. Reentry court. Now I'm going to piggyback after Judge Warren. It got kind of confusing listening to him. But drug court, mental health court, veterans court, we want that. We want those specialized courts. And not just funded at 100. 2 weeks ago, I was in Judge Tynan's courtroom, Criminal Court Building 1, Los Angeles. His co-partner is Judge Manley up here. They run a wonderful program. Offender goes in front of the court. We're working together just like it's proposed here. Offender is given conditional release to the community-based program. That's the reality that happened just 2 weeks ago. Now, what Judge Warren is trying to explain is when we worked together and we activated that, we took action on that, there's a cost savings because now you freed up bed space at state penitentiary. So they want, besides the seed money from the federal government, he's too nice to say it, he wants some CDCR money. Give him whatever percent, matching funds or whatever, to keep that probation/partnership going. We're doing it already, and it works. You got to test the spigot right there. I'm going to hit Prop 63 real quick. My parolee, that because they're denied Prop 63, mental health issues on top of being a parolee, they're in the community, they're here. Just because they're on parole doesn't mean they obviously vanish their mental health issues. They're here. So I'm working with the program, Agent Boudreaux, we can't take this parolee to the next level. Okay, what can we do? Me and the program, we're going to fudge because the parolee is doing well in that non-provided Prop 63 because they're denied Prop 63. They're doing well. We're going to fudge. We're going to find a way to keep them on the books, come under this way. I'm sorry, but it's in the best interest of the public because they're doing well. So here we are, fudging a little bit, me and the program, so that we can maintain public safety and not return to custody. Just a thought. I'll just touch lightly because it's a delicate situation. You've already heard it a gazillion times before. Sex offender Hooverville. We have a saturation of parolee sex offenders. Something will be done. I'll say no more.
Could you conclude your remarks, young lady?
And that concludes my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sure, Senator.
You mentioned the need to provide a identification card when they're released, and you said this could be done by staff 90 days before the release. Was that what you said?
Yes, I did.
Is there a cost involved to get an ID card?
Yes, there is. And parolees, when they come to us, we give them what's called a reduced fee waiver that the DMV recognizes. In an inmate in an institution, I'm sure they would recognize the reduced fee. I would say that the cost comes off their trust account or their books, and if it didn't, then let it come off their gate money so that they hit the gate with that photo ID.
And approximately what is that cost? It's nominal, I believe, isn't it?
$12.
Yeah.
Maybe went to 24, but 12 as far as I know.
Are the prison staff required to do that, or they just do it voluntarily, or they don't do it at all, or they do it only on request of the parolee?
I have not had one parolee show up with a California ID card ever. It's always on after release. But it's something that would facilitate that transition. It might not seem like a big thing, but it's definitely something when they're on that bus and they're traveling north, south, etc.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, Agent, first of all, I want to thank you very much for your candor in some of your comments. I was fascinated with what you were talking about on Prop 63 about how you were fudging certain things there. I hope you don't get in any trouble, but you know, these programs that work, and here we have somebody where the rubber meets the road. I always try to listen to this where we can kind of reinforce these programs almost through, I don't know whether we can do it through legislation, but I do want to talk to you some more about what you were talking about, the mental health program, that if it is working and because of the bureaucracy, we cut it off and it defeats the purpose of what it's accomplishing. So I hope you do that. You talked about the fire camps, which I'm really, really worried about, you know, how we've cut back on that. We're going into the fire season.
Yes, you are.
But at the same time, you talked about jobs and you talked about vocations, on how we might be able to meld that training and maybe some vocations that could actually be part of that OJT for the fires working there. I really appreciated you talking about that because I think there's possibility. I almost thought that some of these comments, maybe we need a joint hearing with the higher education or education committee when you keep talking about jobs, and if these people don't have the jobs or the education or vocation, you know, it's not 2 strikes, it's 3 strikes. So if I could perhaps talk to you afterwards, and as I said, I appreciate your candor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's go to Reverend Langford, and then we can take up other questions. Reverend, welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Pastor Raymond Langford, Executive Director, co-founder of Healthy Communities, doing business as Healthy Oakland, and I'm honored to be a panel speaker today. And give respect to this distinguished body who have an awesome task of making a great decision, and a needed one and a timely one in our society. I'm also joined by some gentlemen, if you all don't mind, standing in the back that have black shirts and blue shirts on. The black shirts are formerly, all of them are formerly incarcerated. The black shirts are employees of Healthy Oakland. The blue shirts are interns of Healthy Oakland. You all may be seated, gentlemen. The distinguished gentleman with them in the black suit, that's Pastor Jasper Lowry, one of my fine colleagues. We're honored to be working with the reentry community. Healthy Oakland is a 501c3. Last year, we became the first African-American faith-based nonprofit to open up and operate a state of California licensed community medical clinic. This is done in partnership with Alameda County Healthcare Services Agency, Alameda County Behavioral Health Services, Alameda County Public Health Department, also Alameda County Social Services Agency, and we also are partnered with the City of Oakland Department of Human Services Measure Y Violence Prevention Program, as well as we have some funding from the Bechtel Foundation and other distinguished organizations that are helping us to reduce violence and recidivism in the City of Oakland. Through our Measure Y Street Outreach Program, the studies show, and they're going to have a presentation before their council this year, that when our guys do street outreach, violence is reduced 30 to 40% in parts of the City of Oakland. As a pastor, over the last several years, I've had to eulogize 15 to 20 funerals, per year. Last year, I was the unfortunate pastor that had to eulogize the funeral of the young man that shot our 4 distinguished officers in the City of Oakland. As a pastor and as a community activist, you know, the community is tired of having to bury young men. Men and women of color are tired of visiting our sons in juvenile hall, in state prison, and federal prison, and we want to see our young men and our young women graduate from Cal State Hayward, from the University of California at Berkeley, from Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. 40 years ago, when I was 8 years of age, I'm 48 now, I had to visit my father in San Quentin prison, and my mother and my grandmother reared me, and they raised me so that I wouldn't go to prison, and I was fortunate to graduate from high school at Fremont. I was fortunate to attend Oregon State University. I'm a part of a great basketball team that won 2 Pac-10 championships. I'm a graduate of Butte Community College. I have an AA in business, and I have my distinguished BA degree from the University of California, Irvine. I was fortunate a few years after that to complete my master's in social work at San Francisco State University. Because of the public safety issues in Oakland, I lost 4 members of my family to gun violence, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and I've seen countless brothers and sisters in my family go to prison. 8 years ago, we created Healthy Oakland, which is a grassroots organization and work through the faith community, partnering with the distinguished businesses that I've shared with you earlier. Through this, this year we have been able to win a contract for $1 million. It's called Open Access, and through our Open Access, by June 30th of this year, we would have served 4,000 reentry men and women. We're the largest provider of reentry health services in Alameda County other than Highland Hospital. We offer what's called integrated health services. When men and women come to our doors, and they come through our doors because of the distinguished young men and women that are behind us. But when they come through our doors, they offer integrated health services. After they go through the registration process, they then are treated and seen by a medical doctor, and after that, the medical doctor makes what's called a soft handoff to the mental health therapist. The mental health therapist then makes a handoff to the case manager. At that point, they're provided other services, a part of the wraparound services that the men and women are eligible for. And it's not just the reentry community, it's the community at large. They can come into our clinic and they can get their income taxes done for free. This year, we returned $150,000 to the Oakland economy. They can get their credit done for free. They can also get financial planning. They can get financial literacy. They can sign up for general assistance. They can sign up for food stamps. They don't have to worry about going to 15 different places. They can come in one place, one location, and they can get the language, they can get the support in English or Spanish. And I might add that this is a wonderful program. It's not because of the professionals. I'm a professional. My colleagues are professionals that provide the great services. But you know why we do this great great work? Because we've been able to employ the men and women behind us. These men and women behind us used to be in the drug trade, used to be in the gun trade, used to be in the gang trade, and now they're in the trade of saving lives and saving souls and helping to improve the quality of life in the city of Oakland. This project is replicatable in any city or county. Tomorrow we will be meeting with Solano County because they're interested in implementing this model. We're not the only model. There are many other models that work, but this is a great model that works. And I can just say my mother, she celebrated my 48th birthday this year because all of her sons and daughters were no longer in prison or in jail, and I would hope that many other mothers can have the experience that my mother had. Thank you very much.
Questions, members of the panel? Thank you. Paul?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the pastor for it's kind of the same thing. Jobs and I really appreciate or laud your efforts about faith-based programs because I think they're very successful, particularly those programs, also the drug courts and some of the other things that are very, very specialized. To me, I'm not as smart as my colleagues. I always have to relate to where where, as I said earlier, where the rubber meets the road, and those programs that work. And to use what you were saying, it's our job to replicate. Those, forget all the panels, everything else, or not really, but take those things that have worked. And as I said, I appreciate bringing these young men with you to be part of your support system. So if we could do that, then I think this would be a successful day, I hope. Thank you.
Members, I'm going to turn this back over to the senator. I have to run to a quick meeting, and then I'll be back as soon as I can.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for this panel? Sorry I had to leave. I understand you were quite stimulating. Reverend, thank you again for bringing all your folks to, and appreciate your words. Colonel Cook is smarter than he lets on. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
That'll bring us to our last panel before public comment, and this is the fiscal analysis, so we'll ask the LAO and the department to come forward. LAO is going to start off, and then Mr. Lewis, if you'd like any comments, and then we'll have questions.
Sure. The committee asked us just to briefly go over the fiscal situation. If you turn to page 25 in the agenda, there's a table there that shows you total criminal justice spending statewide. It's about $30 billion. That includes both state and local government, police, prisons, parole, courts, jails, probation, everything. In terms of CDCR's budget, the governor's proposed budget for 2010-11 is about $8.8 billion. This amount has, in recent years, taken up an increasing proportion of state general fund spending. About 20 years ago, the state spent about 5% of its general fund budget on CDCR operations, and it's increased to about 10% today. Some of the factors that have driven growth in the CDCR budget include inmate population growth, although in recent years the inmate population has been relatively stable. Increase in healthcare expenditures. As you know, we're under various federal court orders and have a receiver overseeing inmate medical care. Increases in employee compensation, inflation, of course. Those are the primary factors that have driven CDCR growth over the past 20 years. As you know, the governor will be releasing a revised budget on Friday. And thinking about some of the ideas that you've heard today, obviously augmenting the budget is probably not a realistic option given the fiscal situation, but I think as various panelists today have mentioned, there are some ways that you could adopt new policies. utilizing existing resources more efficiently, for example. Several of the panelists mentioned using funding on programs that have been proven to work, and you could divert funding from elsewhere from programs that have not been proven to work to do that. Another way you could do that is if you implemented options where there would be corresponding savings. So, for instance, options that would reduce recidivism would save on state costs, and then that funding could be used to expand or establish new programs. And a third one that's also been mentioned on a couple of panels is identifying new funding sources. For instance, last year there was a significant amount of federal stimulus funds that, as some of the panelists talked about, was used for a new probation incentive funding program. And that concludes my remarks, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Lewis, have any comments?
I'd just like to point out that the department hasn't stood still over the last few years as we've faced the challenges that we've gone forward with. I think the panels have largely laid out many of the challenges that the department has faced, including fiscal challenges, and we've largely been asked to do more with less. As a result, we've had to cut our programs in an attempt to serve a larger population or the similar population with fewer resources, have had to implement different models. In addition, we have moved forward with some ideas on reentry and partnering with local counties. And the agenda points out there's an April finance letter that was put forward with a partnership with San Diego County to implement a drug treatment model type program for reentry for parole violators that face a new term in prison, which is different than some of the models that we've previously looked at, which really focused on return to custody inmates instead of those new termers. So the department's been very open to working with the legislature and with all of our stakeholders on finding options to improve accountability, to improve efficiency, and to find ways to reduce costs in corrections as we move forward.
Okay, any questions? I just have, actually maybe a couple. And granted all those things being true, but just in relation to our last hearing and your candor about administration, if, for instance, we wanted to take 20% out of administration and we wanted to maybe as a result of what might come out on Friday, but we wanted to capture some of that and put it into some of the programs we've talked about. What might be the consequences for the organization?
Well, I mean, largely the consequences of reducing administration are reduced services. We're already facing a 5% workforce cap reduction, for example. We've already reduced our administrative positions by approximately 15% through reducing about 600 positions over the past year. We're to the point where accomplishing workload is an ongoing daily, task of prioritizing and finding those things that move forward. I think there's a mistaken assumption that there's a lot of people around CDCR headquarters. Most of those people have a direct support function for the field. A lot of services are centralized within the department, such as accounting services that pay the bills. They're centralized in headquarters, but those it'd be very difficult to function in an institution if vendors aren't being paid and or consequently aren't delivering the services. I think that we are looking at making further reductions, obviously, in order to implement the workforce cap reduction that's already been imposed by the administration. We're moving forward with finding those savings in headquarters, and we'll continue to look for efficiencies. But I think it would be very difficult at this point for us to commit to really doing that without there being severe impacts to our ability to really continue to do training, recruitment efforts, continuing to pay the bills, or some of those functions. Largely those positions that have been added since the reorganization are related to IT projects. It'd make it very difficult for us to move forward with modernizing the department. It's been related to adding out-of-state beds, approximately a little over 100 positions related to adding those out-of-state beds. So we can account for all the position growth and workload increases that have happened. I think that the department faces significant challenges in the oversight arena that we'll continue to go forward with, and we'll be as efficient as possible.
I guess we paid bills before the reorganization, I assumed, in a timely fashion. We didn't have the IT. I appreciate that, and we want to get the IT done, but the idea of the IT is to get to a point where some of those jobs are no longer needed, so there'd be a cost savings there. So it's just, we struggle with this. I'm going to continue to raise the question because, as someone said, we used to be bottom heavy, and now we're both bottom heavy and top heavy. And I know you don't share that, but until I think members of the legislature can hear with a higher level of detail what we got from the reorganization, it begs the question. And when we might start seeing return on that investment, because otherwise all we really see is that the reorganization has made the organization grow with no real specific benefit.
Well, and to be clear too, some workload increases that have happened since the reorganization, just in the area of paying bills. The receiver came on board since the reorganization, and the outside payments to medical vendors have increased by about 400% in that period of time. We've had to become much more efficient in how we pay bills just to maintain the status quo. I think that there are certainly areas where we need to provide more information as to the benefits that we see as a department. Maybe they aren't as obvious to the outside entities. As far as the oversight responsibilities that have increased since the reorganization, and we're committed to providing that accountability to both committees, both the Assembly and Senate Budget Committees.
Okay. Well, I think the most important thing, Mr. Lewis, is for all of us, and I know I'm being redundant, but I'll keep doing it as long as I have this, unfortunately, is this committee assignment, is that opportunity. What we've heard today very clearly is if you spend more money in the front and you spend more money in education, literacy, and substance abuse, then you can expect a return on investment and better outcomes. And it does seem like we're stuck in this pattern, and it's made worse by our financial situation, where we're just trying to cover crisis to crisis, which is just the most amazing self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's not just we're losing money, but we're losing lives in the meantime. And it's not just people in the institution, it's everybody affected by it.
And we'll continue to work with the administration and the legislature to develop better and more programming options as we move forward, and as potentially as opportunities arise. We're certainly open to opportunities where, such as the San Diego model, where we can redirect actual prison ADP, or average daily population savings, to fund programs in the community closer to where those problems occur. And we're continued to be committed to programs like SB 678, as was talked about here, where we can work with our partners in probation and local law enforcement to provide better opportunities to reduce the incarceration costs.
I appreciate that. I just want to, given what we all anticipate happening on Friday, that we're going to have a greatest crisis, at least for me, I think. Those programs are great, but we're probably not going to have the luxury to work incrementally any longer next year or the year after. We're going to have to make more than pilot programs. We're going to have to shift significantly.
I think that's probably accurate.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? That'll bring us to public comment. So anyone here who would like to speak to the panel under public comment, you come forward, have a seat at the table. We'll try to be a traffic, I'm going to say police officer, but I don't know if that's appropriate. If you could come forward, and if we could keep your comments to around 2 minutes. Since I tried 5 minutes with the panelists, I'll try 2 minutes with you.
Mr. Chair, Sue North, representing Ashby Local 2620. A couple of reality checks with respect to a lot of what we've heard here today. We represent among other people, the clinicians that work in health and mental health inside the prisons, as well as in the adult outpatient parole clinics. And we have a line of demarcation that I want to bring to your attention. It's sort of implicit in what people talk about, but it's important to draw the line and distinguish what's happening differently inside and outside. Inside, we have the health receiver and all the edicts that come therefrom in terms of the services that are being rendered. When people come out into the community, there's a very large caseload that's on the shoulders of the people who work in the outpatient parole clinics. The department tends to look at services these days solely in the context of contracting for services. And so the local has taken it upon itself as a cottage industry to sort of watch what the department's doing in terms of the kinds of services they're contracting for. And we file appeals with the State Personnel Board when those contracts parallel what state workers do. We continue to see this loop going around in a circle. That is to say, the little money that's available gets put into a contract that turns out to be inappropriate in the view of the State Personnel Board. And so the ping pong bounces back and forth. The money is there to appropriate for the services to be rendered, but the services don't get rendered because CDCR continues to put it back into contract after contract. We fight the contract, and they refuse to deal with any of these services in terms of the caseload of the state workers involved. I brought with me the latest of these that has to do with services that are provided in the outpatient parole setting. And the department, again, in terms of all reentry programs, the irony here is that the federal court and the sort of pressure that we're under is, on the one hand, unconstitutional health care inside, but also overcrowding and the need to bring people out and deal with recidivism on the outside. And we need to ask you to please ask the hard questions to make sure that what little resources are there are spent properly. If it means expanding the staff in the outpatient parole system, we need to do that once and for all instead of bouncing this money around year in and year out. Thank you.
Next speaker, welcome.
How you doing, Senator? Reverend Dr. Jasper Lowry. Also work alongside with Healthy Oakland and Reverend Langford. And my role in the organization of Healthy Communities is sort of the flip side. When you look at those individuals, they're coming home and they need an address. Where at Rojas Community Services, we provide housing for those that fall between the cracks that may not be going to SAMHSA or some of the other programs that are set up for release inmates, and we bring them home. They get an address where you can not only send them to the clinics, but you can track their behavior and how they're doing and keep up with them for the long haul. But we may not fall on the radar screen with the county or with the city because we're considered the church, but yet we're the first responders when these inmates come home. So groups that specialize, such as Rojas, on the ground, which is just to get them home, sometimes are overlooked. And we find that now we don't have an address, we can't track the inmates, things are going on, we don't know what's going on and where they're at. So I just would say that we would consider looking at the community-based organization groups that are on the ground level running, that work alongside of some that's rising up, that has the best interest in heart. 3,500 people we've worked with over 12 years, 40% was reentry with a 10% recidivism rate. So that lets you know right there that we've been keeping them out of jail. Not only that, the other 30% were dual diagnosed, pill-popping, drug-induced criminals, sex offenders, and so on and so forth, with no return to John George psychiatric wards. They're out. They're at the clinic. Their in-day program. They're receiving their medications and treatments, and they're going on living a productive life, saving the system so much money. But a lot of times we get overlooked because we don't come on their radar screen or we don't show up as the big program. So just to bring that to the table, that we would consider some of these groups that are on the ground. And I do thank you for this platform. You guys, thank you.
Thank you, Reverend.
Juliana Vorse with the Urban Counties Caucus, also here representing the California State Association of Counties. I just wanted to respond to a few of the comments made during the hearing. I think most members know that counties are facing their own deficits, which are pretty large in the urban counties, so we're already fiscally constrained. And some of the preventive programs that previously have helped us reduce costs, like Proposition 36, we've had eliminated funding, and studies have shown how much the cost saver that program is. So before we start doing the slashing and burning and the cost shifts to counties, we would appreciate working with the committee and the staff to try and work collaboratively together to find other ways to help to save money before we just start eliminating programs that are just going to increase recidivism to the state population. And also just a quick note on realignment. I know that was mentioned earlier. Anytime we mention realignment, counties get a little nervous, only because the current realignment we're under is funded by the VLF, and it continues to go down, and we're struggling just to get by and under the current funds we're getting under the current realignment. So we would caution that it needs to be a strong funding source, and counties can't fund that on their own. So appreciate the time to speak.
Maybe we could partner with changing Prop 1A. After all, we're backfilling.
That's on the radar, I'm sure.
Yes, I know. All right.
Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Chairs, members, thank you. My name is Margaret Dooley Samueli. I'm with the Drug Policy Alliance here in California. We've heard a lot about the problem and a lot about the options. I'd just like to focus on one modest proposal that can be part of many needed solutions, and that is that there are federal burn grant dollars available again this year. There were more last year in the stimulus package, but there are more again available this year, $31 million. Interestingly, for the first time ever, the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance has specifically prioritized investing in the full range of services within the criminal justice system, speaking specifically to alternatives to incarceration. So just as California invested in the offender treatment program for Prop 36 clients last year, as well as probation services and reentry courts, not only do we have a precedent now of doing that in the state, we've now got the support of the federal government to spend these burn grant dollars this way. And I'd like to point out that just back-of-the-envelope calculations, what we know about how we spend our burn grant dollars is that if you spend a burn grant dollar on arrests, you generate more than $10 new in state costs. You generate $10 in costs to the state that will not be paid for by burn grant dollars or by asset seizures. Whereas, as the last speaker pointed out, if you invest a burn grant dollar in Proposition 36 treatment instead of incarceration, you'll reduce costs by $2 to $4, mostly in incarceration costs. So in a state where we have 10,000 people going in and out of prison every year, and about a third of prison commitments are drug offenses, continued investment in alternatives to incarceration to treatment for low-level, nonviolent drug offenders is essential this year more than ever, and there's money available to do it that does not require any state match or local match. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon to everybody. I want to thank you all for this wonderful platform and a chance to speak on behalf of myself, Healthy Oakland, and the colleagues here of mine present. I just would like to say, first of all, my name is Alejandra, and hello again. And to just very simply give a human context to the discussions here today, we've heard a lot of numbers being thrown out, very real numbers, and necessary research that needs to be done to continue fantastic work such as that Healthy Oakland is doing. And with that said, I just want to point out that, as I said, in a human context, no longer am I a financial liability, if you will, or a liability to public safety and public welfare. I am now fully employed, full-time employee with Healthy Oakland. Because of Healthy Oakland, I have an opportunity to continue my higher education, and in those respects, again, continue to be a positive contribution to society rather than a detriment to society. And with that said, I want to thank you again for your time, and hopefully you'll take all of these suggestions and comments into consideration. Thank you.
My name is Pat Morris. I'm the mayor of the city of San Bernardino. A city of 210,000 people. We are the county seat of one of our major counties. I host, although I'm 10% of the county's population, I host 23% of its parolees. I'm a city highly challenged with regard to crime. Most of those crimes are committed by those parolees. The recidivism rate is embarrassingly tragic. Before I did this role as mayor for the last 4.5 years, I was a jurist, a Superior Court judge for 30 years in this state, and presided over the criminal courts of our county for many years, and I was one of those judges who helped start the treatment courts of this state and nation. I chaired the National Association of Drug Court Professionals for several years in Washington, and headed up the California Judicial Council Task Force to start treatment courts in this state. Drug courts followed by mental health courts, followed by reentry courts, all of which have found efficacy in helping reduce recidivism by those brought before the justice system. The LAO's report has referred in several of its pages to the efficacious nature of that intervention. Just a brief history of that. About a dozen judges started that idea. Janet Reno was our sponsor in Washington, Lee Brown, and the first of our drug czars under the Clinton administration embraced the idea, went back and testified in those early days of the Clinton administration about this idea, and they bought the idea with a pilot program. About 12 judges from Florida to Philadelphia to California, Judge Tauber in Oakland, Judge Manley in San Jose, and myself were the 3 California judges that took this pilot program out. American University in Washington was the research institution who evaluated the efficacy of that program. That pilot program generated now some 2,000 drug courts across the landscape of every state in this nation and 18 countries across the world, and has generated the idea of collaborative courts in mental health issues as well as returning. There's a host of other reentry courts or collaborative courts that we've identified where this strategy works. As a mayor, I came into this job realizing that collaboration was the key to success. We did it with drug courts, with mental health courts and reentry courts, and so identified in our city a pilot program. You've heard it from Professor Eggleston on panel 4. It's identified in SB 973. It is a collaborative that I brought to the table with Professor Eggleston some 30 partners for a reentry program that we believe will make a profound difference in recidivism among these parolees in our city. Every imaginable service that they will need, with case management constructs that will make it individually effective. I'm confident that if you would pass a pilot program of this type that Senator Negrete McLeod has brought before the legislature, that we will be able to do what we did in drug courts, identify a marvelously effective program, community-based in nature, because it all ends up on our streets. You're up here in Sacramento, but you live in cities, and you know in your neighborhoods who the violators are in criminal justice, and they are largely the tragic, unrehabilitated parolee violators. There's a way to do this and do it right and do it remarkably cheap compared to the $50,000 a year you spend to incarcerate people in our state, 33 state prisons. So I come to you as a mayor with an idea that I think makes an immense amount of sense. You've said, Mr. Chair, that we're at a point of our budget where we can't deal in pilot programs, but I think we have to model some efficacious strategies here. When we brought that model home to California, and I dealt with Governor Wilson and had to get some money from the general fund to fund California drug courts, that was a tough sale. But the evidence that we brought from American University was very persuasive and sold Governor Wilson and his chief of staff, Mr. White, on the idea, and we got into his budget. And you worm your way into policy through good evidence, and we can do that here as well. So I encourage you to look for really quality programs of interested and involved communities who want to solve this problem with you, because it is our problem, really, in our cities and on our streets. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name's David Warren. I'm appearing on behalf of taxpayers for Cleveland Public Safety. Mr. Furutani, you're going to have to listen to me because it's penance for Mr. DeSaulniers being late to my opening prayer at the State Senate. I've listened with great interest to much of the testimony, and what I keep hearing two things. One, we need further studies, and number two, we need to spend money. We don't need any further studies. As Jeannie Woodford pointed out, we've got 15. We already have roadmaps. We know what we need to do. We just don't have the money to spend to do it, and that's the simple reality. So I'd like to make some suggestions that don't cost money, that we can solve some problems. As a chaplain in the state prison system, I've discovered one very important thing, the carrot and the stick. Inmates who have no incentive to do things won't do them. Our sentencing structure of determinate sentences, i.e. 3, 5, 7, instead of low term being 2 to 4, is a disincentive to rehabilitation programming. It costs us money. The legislature can go through the penal code and say, if you behave, you program, you do something, you get out early. That saves us money, it saves everyone money, and it doesn't cost anything to get there. Number two, the volunteer programs in the state of California are being systematically shut down. I'd like to give you the worst case example. At the California Institution for Women, under the Mother-Child Reunification Program, the professionals come to volunteer. The program's been shut down because they won't pay for a correctional officer to be there when the volunteers come. What kind of savings do we have there? At the same time, we're not fixing the roofs on the buildings. We've got water coming in. The heat isn't working. We have inmates getting sick. How are we saving money when we're paying the medical receiver to do this? Last Friday, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that an inmate can sue because he didn't get toothpaste. He's going to end up with projected judgment of $350,000. The state of California does not provide adequate soap, toothpaste, shampoo to its inmates. Under the Sixth Circuit's definition, that's a violation of a constitutional right. Why are we spending money to defend lawsuits instead of providing basic sanitary needs? We are now rationing toilet paper, tampons. What's happened to us? These are short-sighted savings that are going to cost us more, and they don't cost that much. Last case example. The food, because of budgetary limitations, the food in the prisons has reached new and dramatic lows. Unfortunately, I can speak from personal knowledge of this by being there to see it. We all remember the famous quotation, "Let them eat cake." Eventually, the inmates are going to reach such a low that we're going to face an Attica situation. We already have overcrowding, we already have poor medical care, and when the food gets so bad, you're going to have a massive expense. Now is the time to prevent these things. It doesn't cost money to adequately address the issue of appropriate sentencing. It doesn't cost money to provide minimum care for inmates so we don't have massive judgments. These are things that can be addressed regardless of the budget problems that are coming up. Last, and I close with this. Why should I be teaching reading and writing to inmates as a volunteer in the chapel? Right now, at my last service, as part of our discussion, we discussed the prison system's proposal to have inmates teach other inmates. On paper, it may sound good, but when you give a person who has sociopathic tendencies, and that's why they're there, power over other inmates, I suggest to you, you can come to the obvious conclusion of what's going to happen. We have really poor choices being made. I recognize that there are financial limitations. If you're willing to reduce our students' education to 4 days a week while the Chinese and Indian students are going 6, then we're going to have to face the practical reality that we cannot continue to house the inmate population that we have. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Kern, a 25-year educator in the Department of Corrections, and As people who know me know, I could say a lot. I'll try not to. In reference to all the testimony today, I would draw your particular attention to, as it happens, 3 women: Cindy Greer, the teacher in our prison system for women; Jeannie Woodford, the former agency secretary and warden of San Quentin; and Agent Boudreau, parole agent, who all 3 have been face-to-face, as I have, with inmates on a daily basis as a way of making our living, trying to operate prisons safely and trying to make sure that those who leave our gates don't come back. And as Jeannie eloquently put it, and others have echoed, we don't need more studies. We know what works. We know common sense. We know toothpaste is a requirement and doesn't need to be a subject of a lawsuit. You know, I don't know how to break through and point out that we have become so dysfunctional that here we are again with me reminding this body that somehow we decided there was evidence, that there was an evidence-based decision that could be made to shutter vocational programs at a high rate, almost 50%, from a level that was already inadequate a year ago, and claim that that was somehow going to save money. I'm sorry that Member Arambula couldn't be here right now because I wanted to quote his words back to him at the end of a rather similar hearing on December 8th last year that he chaired in his former role that you now fill, Member Furtani. He said, in the words of the farmers from the area I'm from, don't step over $1 to pick up a dime. And that was his reflection of my testimony at that time. Very short-term savings when you cut correctional education and other rehabilitative programs that work. The programs with aftercare, the substance abuse, the arts in corrections. Even our librarians have now been hit. In the questions and answers that the Office of Correctional Education have published to answer the questions of their school principals about how these new magic models are supposed to work. Will inmates still be able to get access to learning materials? And the answer was, well, there's always the library. Well, the new rules for the libraries are going to require the libraries to be closed more than ever because now inmates will have paging services. In particular, when they're locked down, when their particular ethnic group is locked down, their particular wing is locked down, or for whatever medical or other reason that they can't make it to the library themselves, including their own misbehavior in the library that could prevent them from coming. So we have really lost touch with reality, and we've lost touch with, you know, Senator DeSaulnier said we used to be bottom heavy, and now we're bottom heavy and top heavy, and, you know, it may be that we're getting kind of columnar, because even the middle, from the point of view of a correctional educator, is looking pretty heavy. We have 113 vice principal and principal positions supervising the few remaining educators in our system. And Senator Negrete McLeod at a previous hearing asked, what do they do? And I couldn't answer. I really was silent for a while. When they're working well, they have a fabulous role to play. We all do. But it's the people in corrections that work face-to-face with the inmates, that work and hold their hand and move them out through the system, make sure the handoffs are good, make sure the parole works, that reentry preparations have been made, that the ID cards, for heaven's sakes, the simple things that you might not think of that might make the difference between that guy making it with the support he needs until he doesn't need it anymore, or she, and the difference between that system and the one we're running now, where it seems like almost perversely the vast majority of the decisions are designed to perpetuate the system and to prevent the success of the inmate. I'm not here to talk about dollars and cents. I'm not that good at that. But when I started my career in 1984, which happens to be the first end of the chart in your agenda, when the incarceration rate started to skyrocket. I don't blame myself, but the gate money that Agent Boudreau referred to was $200. An inmate would leave his sentence with $200 to try to make it to his next life. That amount today is still $200. Now, I don't know if it was adequate in '84, and I don't know if it's reasonable now, but it just is just one more example of the accumulation of decisions that we've made, this body has made, that citizens have made, that are unrealistic and unsustainable. I don't know how else to put it. So the current picture in corrections, in the institutions, we have a VOC instructor for about every 1,000 inmates incarcerated. We have an academic teacher for maybe about every 400. And as I mentioned before, we have enough supervisors for those teachers to have a ratio of about 1 to 4.5, if my math is right. Reentry training, none. College, no funding. If anybody gets a college unit, it'll be because they paid for it themselves and figured out a way to do it. And librarians, I already mentioned. Overworked as it is, meeting the legal needs and the recreation needs and the educational needs now of an underserved population. And on top of all that, they're supposed to be delivering legal materials into the wings for the inmates that are unable to get to the library. It's, as the inmates would say, off the hook. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairs. Ignacio Hernandez on behalf of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice. We are a statewide association of criminal defense attorneys, and just want to add a few points, hopefully not reiterate what's already been said by many of the speakers. You know, I've been working on these issues here in the Capitol in some capacity for the past 11 years. And on the one hand, I'm extremely encouraged by a lot of the testimony today. And on the other hand, I'm extremely discouraged because I've been hearing a lot of the same very good, insightful observations for the last 11 years. And to varying degrees, we've carried out some of the proposals over the last few years, but we need to do more. And it's really not just a lack of money. It's really we need to reprioritize. And let me just throw out a few things that we can do going forward that sometimes we overlook in this discussion. We don't talk enough about what is happening at the county level with misdemeanors and even infractions. And why that would be important at the state level is our courts are overworked, underfunded, and we're every year here trying to figure out what to do to keep funding to our courts. And yet we've done little oversight as to the very minor misdemeanors that our local law enforcement are arresting and sending people to our courts and filling up calendars, and the impact then on the state, because we're trying to cover court security fees, we're trying to cover other costs to the court. And I can tell you, if you go down to K Street anytime at 3 o'clock or so, you will find anywhere from 5 to 7 law enforcement and also some probation officers walking up and down by the mall and picking people up for very minor offenses. And yet we've yet to score what that impact is on our courts when we're here talking about court funding every year and ongoing it as we're doing right now. So we need to start asking the question of local law enforcement, where are the priorities? So that's one thing. And I can tell you, just on a side note, I saw a kid about a year ago for spitting on the sidewalk. I was standing there and I was watching for a while just to see what people were getting arrested for. And they picked him up for spitting on the sidewalk. I happened to see that kid in court last week for something else because he hadn't shown up to court or missed his court appearance. So it just goes on and on. There's been a lot of discussion about wobblers and grand theft. Who are we actually sending to our state prisons? That is always, you know, the inflow. We changed 36 property crime thresholds last year, but we did not change grand theft, which is the main one. So we need to do better at that. Prison programs I won't repeat because we've talked about that, but obviously the funding needs to be there. Reentry can work, does work. We've heard from other programs. I know we had a program in Gardena, a number of other programs come a couple of weeks ago where the recidivism rate was in the area of 6-7% for most programs. The Gardena program has been 0 for the last 5 years for, you know, the young offenders. So we can do it. Unfortunately, that program has had a line item zeroed out for the last 6 years. And I know we were flush with money, you know, maybe 10 years ago, and we say we have no money, but it's priority. For a $1,000 criminal fine, there's another $2,500 to $3,000 in fees. Not 1 cent goes to programs to reduce recidivism. Not 1 cent. Okay, we fight over that money for court operations. We fight over it for a number of other things. But they say crime doesn't pay. Well, it's just maybe not paying into the right fund. But we need to look at that. And why are we more crimes just paying for the system to continue, but not paying for the system to reduce itself? The last thing I'm just going to point out, or actually two last things, are we know, and even the studies that were produced by this committee, education, job training, and drug treatment are probably provide the greatest savings in the reduction in recidivism. And yet, that's where we lack in funding. And even in 678, which is a phenomenal bill that was adopted last year, if you look at the language, there's no requirement for job training or education programs to be funded. And so, we've got to just kind of catch on to that a little bit better. And also, when folks are being released from prison, we're still fighting over giving them an ID as they walk out of the gate. We still can't even get that passed and signed into law across the board so that prisoners, their first step out, we've made it easier for them to reintegrate. So I want to thank you for this hearing. You've done a great job. And let's keep going forward and get some of these results. Thank you.
How you doing? I just want to say hello. And my name's Sean Vasquez. I represent Healthy Oakland. And thank you for this board and this opportunity for me to get up here and speak today. I just want to speak on the behalf of the probation officer lady that was up here today and about the programs for everyone that's just getting out of prison. I just got out of federal prison 7 months ago. And when I was in prison, I didn't have no outlets about what I was going to do. First thing I thought about was selling drugs again. And, I got out and I was in a federal halfway house, and, I ran into a few people that was working for Healthy Oakland, and they gave me an opportunity to come up there and get a job. And gave me a place to stay. I was one of the ones in the community that was caught up in gang activities, selling drugs, committing a lot of crimes. I never had an opportunity for someone to give me a chance. And Raymond Langford, Jasper Larry was there to pick me up and lead me in the right directions. And I just want to ask the board if y'all have any power, if anything y'all can do to help the community that's coming out of prison to come back into society. We really need help, because it's a lot of us up in there that don't have no education. It's a lot of us that gave up on ourselves, and we have kids. A lot of us don't know how to be parents to our kids. And if it's job opportunity, if it's programs out there to teach us and to lead us in the right directions, then we would have a second chance in life. I just come up here today to say, please, if y'all can do anything, please do it, because we hurting out here. And I just want to thank y'all for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. That's about as a good a way to end the hearing as possible, other than to thank you all. I'll turn it over to my colleague here for any closing comments, and to ask you all to help us come up with implementation and strategies where we can actually take the knowledge we've learned, and as we've just been asked quite eloquently, to provide the necessary help.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to thank all of you that came and testified today. I know we were very ambitious with the many panels, and there was a lot of information that was presented, but I think there were some very clear themes that came out of the collective presentations by everybody here. And one of them clearly was the fact that we can study and we use data and all of those things in terms of research, but it seems like we have quite a few studies and quite a few recommendations that we can work with to put together the basics on how we're going to move forward. I think the other thing that was very clear is that the programs that are best practices and clearly have shown that they work well either on the front end, the middle, or the back really involve getting people educated, giving them the tools, as Mr. Dessalines said, in terms of the toolbox to be able to deal with the challenges in society. How to do that, needless to say, is the question. I think the last thing that clearly is the message in terms of the community, and I think the Reverend and his program, that the key to this whole thing is partnering. People trying to point and say they're going to do it or they're going to do it. We are all going to have to collectively do this. It's going to take a lot of creativity and work. The context we're in is not isolated to just corrections and the issue of prisons and what we're talking about. The context that we're in is with everything in society, whether it's education, healthcare, human services, it's all interconnected. So we can't talk about fixing one without talking about fixing the other. So it's all interconnected. This issue that we're going to deal with, although it has the definite characteristic of dollar and cents, when you get right down to it, it's going to be about people. And so I look forward to the challenge. I'm an education background. I don't have background in prisons. I'm on a quick, steep learning curve, learning as fast as I can. But with Mr. Dessalines, and one thing he told me in our first meeting, that he's looking for a master plan relative to this issue of corrections, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about. I come from education. We have a master plan for higher education. That's what has been successful, and I think that's what's going to be successful relative to corrections as well. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for your testimony. I know some people maybe got caught off a little bit. I know all of you could go a whole lot longer than 5 minutes, each one of you, but that's the nature of a hearing. Thank you very much.
We're adjourned.
Thank you. Go back to the office. We'll debrief on some.